All right, we're going to be starting up here. Thank you guys for joining me. As usual, today is day 12 of the summit. It's going to be continuing for a little bit more while into the month, but the final days are near. Very near. And so, I encourage you guys stay tuned for the 16th, for the live roundtable on the 16th, 8 p.m. EST. Alright, today we have Henna Maria and Aaron Nebbia, and then the other interview, which I will not be playing, is Bridget Kaiser Sherman. I recommend watching it on your own time if you want. It's all about money and financial exploitation and voluntarism. And so today we will be watching some of the interviews, and if you want to watch all the others, recommend signing up for endofslavery.org, and we have featured videos as well, which we will watch today. Good stuff. People will be peeping in here as the videos are playing, and for those of you who are watching the VOD, that being the finished live stream, welcome. Peace out. Time to begin.
And sometimes that would mean that you are interpreting.
Here we go. Henna Maria, everybody.
Hello and welcome. This is Corey Angelot. Welcome to the End of Slavery Summit. I'm here with Henna Maria. She's an activist, speaker, poet, and practitioner of ancestral healing arts. Her advocacy focuses on the spiritual reality of life, human and animal rights, medical freedom, and self-sovereignty. I'm very glad to be joined by you. You have a lot of works and you have a lot of websites too. dawnofpeace.org, hennamaria.community, and policeforfreedom.org. I definitely want to talk about those projects. Could you kind of fill us in what we're going to be talking about today? Spiritual contracts that enslave us, why that's important, and how does this relate to a lot of the work you've been doing?
Yes. Thank you, Corey, for having me on. And thanks to everyone who's tuning in. So I wanted to take this topic to the forefront because I genuinely believe that our activism cannot bear fruit unless there's an inner alignment, on a core level. So we have a lot of information available. We have a lot of ideas on what to do with the information. But if we don't have the fundamental resonance of freedom on a soul level, I believe we actually start creating a lot of conflict and a lot of confusion with our activism. So this is why I believe there's a lot of discrepancy in what we want to create and what we actually meet when we're on the streets. So my work, having been a part of several different movements, I've been an activist for 16 years, was to find what is like the underlying most important root cause for our suffering. And of course, it's slavery, but I would say it's spiritual slavery. So that's at the core of everything. And so even though I have actions and causes that are focusing on the mundane and on the 3D, so to say, I always do my best to bring it down to values and spirituality so that there can be that inner alignment.
Okay, so let's start there. What does it mean to say spirituality? Because a lot of people might get different views of that. Like, is it meditating? Is it, deep breathing? Is it having a certain practice in particular? What
Yeah.
constitutes spirituality and why is that important?
I see spirituality is a dimension of our being that encompasses things like truth, morality, freedom, love. So the invisible, unseen world that we are experiencing. And I see that without understanding the natural law, which is at the core of knowledge, of course, we are stuck in a victim mentality and we are stuck in the effect, not seeing what is actually the underlying cause of everything. So spirituality to me isn't necessarily to do with any sort of external acts. It's simply a dimension of reality that helps us when we start to peek into that dimension. We start to have clarity. We start to be able to actually manifest and start to be able to create on this realm. Because as long as I see that, as long as we're not aware of that dimension of reality, the spiritual dimension of reality, we are stuck in an unconscious creation. And this is why we do a lot of, we see that what is around us is not actually representing what most people want. It's because we have so much inner conflict. And so spirituality is a pursuit of truth, pursuit of freedom, pursuit of knowledge for me.
Right. Because you're saying it's all around us. I mean, it's something
Yeah.
that is sort of this universal, timeless knowledge that we need to understand. You said truth,
Yeah.
right? And morality. So yeah. So when you say spiritual contracts enslave us, what do you mean by contracts? Are we signing ourselves up to things we don't realize we're signing ourselves up to? Because you said we're unconscious.
Yes. So since reality is a co-creation, it's a collective creation, aggregate creation, then what we're witnessing, the condition of reality, is that. This is the effect of our actions, right? And our beliefs. So when we condone certain behaviors, or when we accept, certain conditions of reality without trying to reconcile things in ourselves or trying to affect a positive change around us, we are constantly coding that condition into reality again and again and again. So I see this in everything. First and foremost is our communication. Okay, so every time we speak, it's like we are offering a contract. And what I mean by that is, how do we communicate? Okay, are we exaggerating? Are we telling half truths? Well, there isn't really such a thing as half truths. It's truth or lie. So are we
Right.
speaking the truth? And what I mean by that, it doesn't have to be something mystical and something grandiose, but am I actually being sincere? Am I being authentic? If I'm not, basically, what I'm coding in the reality, what message I'm sending in reality is that this is okay. It's okay to not be authentic. It's okay not to tell the truth. And therefore, this is what I will receive in return as well. This the age-old, gem of wisdom. Don't do unto others what you don't want to be done to you, or vice versa. Do unto others what you want to be done to you. So if we are seeking authentic relationships, connection, trust, confidence amongst each other, but we don't write that in the terms and conditions of our own communication, we will never get it. So that's the contract. If I set a standard in my communication that I'm going to be even vulnerable if it comes down to it, and I can admit things that I may be ashamed of because I honor truth so much, and I want that to be a fundamental value in my relationships and my connections, then that is what will inspire others to feel a permission to do the same. So if I have this commitment to authentic communication, then I will begin to attract that around me. And even if, let's say, someone isn't used to that, in that presence, they will feel this is allowed, and that I won't be judged for this because, the soul opposite me is holding space for that, because they've come to terms with how much it means. So it's the price that we give to our integrity, how much it means to us. And if we don't value that a lot, then that is the coding again that we are giving into this reality, and then that is the feedback that we will get in return. And this is why we live in the era of post-truth, because we've come to accept that collectively, that you don't need to speak the truth. And so what we're seeing is constant lies all around us.
So we're sort of giving way to evil through this contract, like through essentially our consent.
Yes.
And we're somewhat unconscious of it too. So it's sort of like, the slave on the plantation who doesn't know that there could be freedom, or they're convinced that they should be a slave, and so they're dishonest to their reality, that the fact that they're free, or the slave master is dishonest to the fact that the slave could be free, and is dishonest to the slave, saying, you know, you are meant to be a slave. Like, there is dishonesty there. Is that sort of what enslaves us? So the opposite side of that would be the spiritual contract that frees us. So realizing and being honest, and then saying, no, actually, you are free by nature because you were never in chains. You know, you never born out of the womb with chains on you. Like, you're not born out of
Yeah.
the womb with this contract bound to you, written by man, right? It's given to you by God, or by what we mentioned before, natural law, right? So it's
Yeah.
different.
Yeah, that's a kind of a, let's say, an extreme example of that. But yes, it's true. And it also would be like the situation of the slave. Are they willing to recognize their condition of slavery? Are they willing to listen? Because I would claim that the slave, even if he'd never seen anything else, would feel inside him some sort of restriction, some sort of contraction, feeling that this isn't all there is to me. You know,
I
I
see.
believe, you know, that there is this push, because how come then us who've been born into slavery and been born into the zoo have still that yearning to step out? So
Right.
I believe it is like a flame that is ever alive and is roaring. It's just that, are we allowing ourselves to listen to that? Are we allowing ourselves to receive the communication of nature, which is the ultimate expression of truth? So it's not that we are alone here. We're constantly receiving signals from everything around us, you know, whether it's the trees, the elements, the angels. So we're part of this interconnected web of life. And the fact that we have accepted our own slavery, I'm sure that there is more and more impulses coming from nature to try and expose that to us. And so the level of authenticity that's required of us would be to recognize, yes, I am a slave first and foremost, and that is not who I truly am, though. Like, this is a condition that has been imposed upon me,
Right.
and a lot of us have accepted it out of comfort. So this is when we go into the deeper layers of these contracts. How far are you selling yourself into? You know, how far is the slavery going?
It's
You
kind of
know,
like having diabetes and, like, I'm a diabetic, but you're not supposed to. You maybe could get out of that
yeah,
diabetes. You possibly can reverse it. If you keep thinking you're a diabetic, then you're, like, identifying with this thing and attaching yourself to that thing, when it's possible you are not a diabetic by nature. You know, you're not
yes,
supposed to have that.
exactly. Recognizing who are you and who you are not. And so when it comes to the communication, there's several things that are related to it, because how do we know how to communicate authentically if all we do is consume fiction? So this is one big part of my advocacy, is to try and get people out of watching movies and series, because I honestly, what I see there, what I perceive, is that it codes our consciousness to lies and inauthentic emotional expressions and inauthentic models of relation, models of relating, and models of relationships, models of families, models of intimacy, models of possibility of what humanity is and what culture could be like. Culture
Yeah.
being basically, how do you grow a human being, you know, cultivating a soul. So if we consume this poison, this poisonous fiction day in and day out, then it tunes our consciousness to that level where we actually start to have a lot of difficulty recognizing our own true inner voice and our own true expressions, because we're mirroring that which we take in. It's like the mind is an echo chamber. So if you're constantly feeding some sort of, you know, characters and fictitious life stories and chains of events that make no sense, that actually don't mirror natural law, don't mirror true cause and effect, like the bad guy is always the hero, oftentimes, you know? So then that starts to cloud your judgment or your discernment. And it starts to cloud your internal periscope to your own inner world. So then how can you speak with authenticity if you're living in this like sewer of of poison basically internally when it comes to authenticity. So the first step would be to start the detox so that you can bring that internal clarity back into your senses and back into your discernment. So this is one contract that I see we do to ourselves when we watch these things unconsciously and allow it to code our perception of reality, our perception of humanity, our perception of emotional spectrum. There's all these prejudices we have. Women are emotional, or like there's so much judgment on authentic expression of pain, and which I see is actually crucial for us to grow. Because how can you grow as a human being if nobody's giving you the feedback of the pain that you're causing? So if we all started crying when someone hurt us, we would grow spiritually so fast. We would mature so fast. But because we've come to learn that crying is a sign of weakness, we hold it in. And so then we don't give each other these signals that would actually invite our heart to open and to start thinking, what am I doing? What is my effect on the people around me?
Yeah. And I'm a guy, I shouldn't cry, I should be tough. Like, no, I've cried many times, even in public, because I would talk to people in politics about some of these ideas and they don't care. And so I would end up crying because some of them would go to the extent of just totally ignoring me, or saying like, well, if you don't like what we're saying, then leave, or go to someone. Like, they just, where is the empathy? Where's the humankind?
So
Where's
dehumanized our state
Yeah.
of
And when you
like our
talk
culture.
about movies, and you said, like, if you're unconscious of consuming it, sort of like take eating a food and being unconscious of what it's doing to you, the
Yeah.
same deal. But like, let's say somebody is working all day long and they have all this stress, and then they want to go home and unwind their mind. The first thing they might turn on is TV, and they're not so conscious because they want to unplug, right, from reality.
Yes.
So the
Yeah.
first thing they do is plug into this artificial reality to sort of cope with themselves. But is that the best thing they can do? Is there a better method? Is there a practice they can utilize to perhaps make themselves feel better? Would you say there is perhaps a spiritual contract in this moment that they can do instead of watching TV?
Yeah. Well, in that moment, what they're doing is they're basically saying it's okay for people to take advantage of me when I'm in a weak state, because you're putting this program on and you're going into a state of rest, and so your level of consciousness is more receptive now. You're more in a hypnotic state when you're tired, and then when the brainwashing and the programming starts to enter, and you're okay with that, again, that's another contract that you're creating for yourself, that it's okay for people to take advantage of me and install hostile belief systems and spiritual poisons into my mind when I'm weak. And so this is like a horrible thing. So what you could do instead is rest and just listen to yourself. How am I feeling? Maybe put on some really beautiful music and just, what happened to just being? What happened to just, why do we have to constantly take something else in?
Exactly.
So we have also this like terrible saturation of junk knowledge and junk information that is just clouding our clarity and our discernment. So this is one thing, is what you take in, but also then it's like, how do we behave? That's another aspect of what kind of contracts are we making. For me, it was very clear when I started learning about healing arts that truth is at the core of healing, that actually everything comes down to truth. As long as I'm not truthful about my own emotions, and I'm not truthful to myself about the state of my life, then I can't possibly heal those things. So first and foremost, I have to be able to see myself and my life with clarity, including the things that I don't want to see, including the things that I would normally want to run away from, or that I would be in denial of. I would have to see those aspects of myself that I'm not fond of to be able to start transmuting them. So truth is at the very core of that. But if we can't catch ourselves in those behaviors that are harmful to ourselves and our relationships, our work, our well-being, then we can never change them. So one of the first things for me was, okay, now that you know what is the price of freedom spiritually, there's no more excuse for you to act out of alignment. Like, it's an absolute commitment to truth. And what does that mean? It means if someone gives you the wrong change in the shop, in a grocery store, and you clock that and you're aware this is not my money, this does not belong to me, you have to give it back every single time. Because if you don't, again, you're starting to walk a little bit out of the light, in the shadow, and you're starting to, again, create a contract. It's okay to take advantage of someone if they're not aware of it. And so if you do that to someone else, by that same token, by that same contract, you're saying it's okay for others to take advantage of me when I'm not aware. So when you start walking the path of truth, this is how you get protection as well, because you're coding your interactions in your life with this level of morality. Whereas if you don't do that, you're constantly attracting that people wanting to take advantage of you because you're doing that to others. Even if it's the tiniest thing, still, it's like you have to know what belongs to you, what doesn't belong to you. Which
And
is,
that's
of course, at the
interesting.
core of natural law, right? Is property rights.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, like how you can find security out of understanding that morality. Because, you also mentioned that truth is the prerequisite for freedom. And a
Yeah.
lot of people, when they think of freedom, they might fear it because they lack security, or they lack the sense of, well, who's going to do this and protect that? And it's all about protection, right?
Mm-hmm.
Protecting your rights, protecting your assets. Well,
Yeah.
are other people really responsible for that protection, for your rights, for your assets? And so isn't that interesting? You mentioned to me that sort of for truth you have to have that sort of protection, and it protects you, and but yet, you're also saying it's a prerequisite for freedom. And so many times people correlate freedom with chaos.
Yeah. Yeah. Ultimate freedom is responsibility.
Mm,
Because when you truly want that level of freedom, you're willing to take responsibility for everything in your life. And when you know that, then it means you have to be able to start building trust. Because none of us can survive here by ourselves. We need community. We need trusted, friends around us.
mm.
And how can you have that? Well, you need trust. For there to be trust, there has to be truth. You can't have trust without truth. And so when you have truth, you have trust. And when you have trust, you have security.
Hmm.
This is how we build the communities. This is honestly, this is the remedy. It
Yeah.
all boils down to truth. Yes.
And because you're able to live your life as you please and do what you want with your own property, then you're technically free as well, right? So
Yeah.
it's interesting how that works because, again, to kind of relate it to the 1800s, because I like to do that since I, wrote a book about it and such. If the slave recognizes, hey, I'm free, and they put that into practice because they free themselves, because they recognize their sovereign, they're putting the truth principles inside them. They're embracing honesty, as we would say,
Yeah.
and that gives way to their freedom. So actually, it's interesting, but having that sense of security gives way to freedom, and that
As
freedom
well.
it makes an obligation for that security, right? Because like, oh,
Yes.
I'm free to do this or that. Well, now you're obligated to be responsible to have security. So it's
Exactly.
interesting how they work together.
Yeah.
Unless we think there has to be a middleman, and we have this belief system that we aren't supposed to be responsible, or we aren't supposed to have that security coming from ourselves. So
I truly believe that belief system, well, I believe that belief system, maybe just that I have clarity on this. That belief system comes from us not knowing ourselves.
hmm,
So the know thyself is a prerequisite for that. If you don't know yourself, then you don't know that we have the capacity to recognize the difference between right and wrong and truth and lie. But if we are living in this spiritual poison and we are consuming lies and we are like animals in a zoo, completely domesticated and controlled and oppressed, then we may come to take that bait and believe that somehow we need the cage. Because God forbid, if we didn't have the cage, we would all kill each other. It's like there's a fundamental lie at the core of that people have accepted and made a part of their belief system. That we need the government, we need these systems of hierarchy, because if they weren't there, we would all destroy each other. We would steal each other's property. No work would ever get done, which is the opposite. Because if you look at any kind of, let's say, village out there in the countryside, and something needs to be done, you will have someone in the community who will volunteer. Hey, well, I got the digger driver, John there, do you want to come and help me out? Yeah, okay. Well, Lisa, can you make food for us while we're doing this? And yeah, okay, I'll do this. So it's a very self-organizing principle that we have. If you remove that control, we are capable of just recognizing what needs to be done, solving problems. And when there is that trust and fundamental respect for each other, then we won't take advantage of each other, and we will want to just do the right thing. And we'll all step up. I mean, I see all the time. And I always, when I think of, okay, what would the free, harmonious community look like? You go to a public park or a beach, and most of the time, there's no agents of authority anywhere to be seen. And yet, there are people from all ages, all demographics, all ethnicities, and they are coexisting, and they're doing different things. Okay, these guys, they have the freedom of association, of course. So they are wanting to be together because they're friends. And nobody's feeling discriminated or left out. They have their own thing that they're doing. So maybe they're playing volleyball. These guys are building sandcastles. Well, this person here is praying. That one is swimming. And nobody's, sticking their nose in anyone else's business. I honestly think if you just give yourself a chance to experience that, that's freedom. Just next time you're on a beach or a park, look around and see, do we really need some sort of armed men patrolling us? Or can we handle this? Do we got this?
Right.
And we do.
Yeah. And even looking at neighborhoods too, sometimes like you can just look around and it's like people are doing their thing. Like you said, they're minding their own business. They already know what boundaries are. I mean, and they have that instinctually. And at this point, most people recognize that chattel slavery of the 1800s is wrong, right? Like, how did we get there? Through an evolution in morality. But like now, no one's not even going to try it because everybody knows it's wrong. No one's going to even attempt. It's like we've gotten to the point where it used to be common practice everywhere. Now, literally, no one will do it ever, and no one's telling. Like, there's not some people always patrolling saying you can't do that. Everybody just knows that it's not to do, that they shouldn't do it. Right? So that's amazing. So I want to go a little bit into the action that you think is required to sort of do that. But before we do that, if you don't mind, what about your personal experience with this belief system we're talking about, statism, this belief in authority? How long were you a statist? Because, I was in this mindset too myself for a while. And how did you get out of that?
Yeah, well, wow, an eagle just flew by. That's an incredible symbol. Wow, symbol of freedom. It happened when I moved to the Amazon rainforest. And so 2014 was my first time in Peru. I would say 2011, I started feeling more and more dysfunctional in a regular society. And I was in university. I was studying multinational communications or multicultural communications and translation sciences. And I was studying to become a simultaneous interpreter. And so in my master's course, part of it was to already start the work. So I actually worked for the Finnish Defense Forces and the UN as an interpreter. And in that experience, I started feeling the cage, like more and more. And I didn't have freedom of speech because as an interpreter, you have to just relay messages back and forth. You're not allowed to put any input from your beliefs, from your values. And sometimes that would mean that you are interpreting things that you're morally completely against. So I said, okay, I'm out of this. It started really rubbing me. So I quit the academia. I didn't finish my degree. And I just said, screw this. There has to be something more to life. So then I moved to London, started studying theater because I felt there's something there in the arts that has taken me closer to the soul expression of a human being. Something I was very drawn by, that expression when people are actually, communicating with emotion, even if that would be false emotion. But still, that was drawing me outside of this machine-like sterile environment to something alive. And then through the arts, I was taken to many different paths, but I ended up in the healing arts. And so I met my husband. He was in the music industry, and he was already drawn to learn the ancestral healing arts. We went to Peru together, and then I sat with ayahuasca, which I'm sure many of the listeners are aware of, is an extremely powerful entheogenic ancient medicine from the rainforest. And so not only did this medicine blew my world apart, but the people and the society, you know, if you can call that a society, these communities in the jungle and their value systems. And I felt like for the first time in my life, I met true human beings, free beings. And what they were telling me and the way they were communicating and just their presence alone, it was like something started to be tuned in my consciousness. And I started to understand how controlled our existence is in the West. And I started to see the mental prisons and what I had to purge out of my consciousness and all the imprints. So the first ceremony I ever had, actually, I saw all the, what I now would name black magic of the West imprinted on my consciousness. I saw all the brand names. I saw so many like clips from horror films and violent scenes from movies and pornography and alcohol and drugs and neon lights and all this like carnival of hell basically imprinted into my mind. And I was like, oh my God, is this what's in me? Is this what is inside my mind? And then through these ceremonies, you know, starting to really clear your vision, your memory, your consciousness, starting to experience what it feels like when your mind is your ally. I grew up thinking that my mind is an enemy and that's central, like that is the fundamental nature of your mind, that your mind is always nagging, is always worried, is always anxious, you know, that you never feel peace. I thought that's just the human mind. And this is why I thought, well, with meditation, you try and get out of the mind, you try and silence the mind. Well, with all that junk there, you can't do that. But when you have these incredible plants that are installed in this creation for the purpose of cleaning ourselves, like purifying ourselves spiritually and energetically, you begin to see, wow, this is what an indigenous man's or woman's mind is like. Wow, this is the level of clarity I can have. This is the level of vision I can have and memory. So I started experiencing what is freedom mentally. And then that was the domino that just blew open everything. You know, I was already a conspiracy theorist before that, but it wasn't embodied. It wasn't this embodied realization of how diabolical is the Western culture and how enslaved we are on so many levels. You know, that it's not enough just to say, I choose not to pay taxes or I don't pay fines or whatever. What is inside here? Am I free in here? Am I free in here? Because if not, you're still a slave. So this is why I'm interested in the spiritual freedom. And I see that when you get there, when you really own your mind, when your mind is your ally, your friend, it's serving you, from that place, whatever action you do will have just tremendous, you know, force behind it. It will have different sort of resonance.
Wow. Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. So you have created, after, you know, your discoveries and through your awakenings, and, you know, as many other people as well. I mean, you're not alone. I mean, you're just looking at what reality is given, right? What is already here. You're not inventing anything new. You're recognizing what already is here. So you made, however, some websites and some movements. You said you were like sort of an activist. So what got you into that? And is it sort of this process of awakening? It sort of led you there?
Yeah. Well, I started, you know, I had quite a wild teenage years. I moved to actually San Francisco when I was 18. It was a very wild romance, kind of Romeo Juliet type of thing with a gangster, and it didn't end well. But in that time, I got to see how screwed up the American society is. I'm from Finland. So there you have this illusion of human rights and the government looks after you and whatever. But when I got to see the homelessness there, that's what did something for me. So my first cause was to help the homeless in California. When I came back to Finland, I started working for the Amnesty, again, not knowing that, you know, they're not really doing what they're claiming to be doing. So I was in these wrong places to begin with. And this is where some people think, oh, she's controlled up. She worked for the military and the UN and Amnesty. Well, you can think that if you want. But I learned that these places are not what they claim they are. So I had this cause, you know, that I want to help people find security, happiness, their rights. So human rights was a big thing for me. But then as part of my own healing and spiritual path, I started to resonate more with the suffering of all beings. So then animal rights became a really big cause for me. But I saw that a lot of animal rights activists don't care about humans. There's a lot of misanthropy there. A lot of animal rights activists would not think twice to hang slaughterhouse workers or you know, factory farmers. And then I would see the same in the human rights camp. They wouldn't care 2 cents about the suffering of a cow or a pig or a lamb. And that felt crazy to me. Like, aren't we just talking about the same thing? We're talking about slavery. We're talking about torture. We're talking about, you know, stealing the rights of a being that wants to be free. So this is where Dawn of Peace came from. It's my attempt to bring together all of these different things and go to the core of it, which is the spiritual reality that actually all beings want to be free. And how can we transform our lives in a way that we can facilitate that? How can we heal this earth? And how can we heal ourselves? So it's weaved together with my practice, you know, apprenticing with the Shipibo, the indigenous people, and seeing what is valuable for them, what sovereignty means. And then from that place, creating content and street events. So we do a lot of dialogues, Socratean method. Just go to the streets and ask questions and talk to people. And this is what we've been doing now for the last 2 and some years, from June 2020, with the medical freedom as the core cause there. But yeah, so that's Dawn of Peace. And then I don't know how it even happened, but I ended up making friends with some awake police here in Spain. And that was another thing where I saw that here's a polarity. So I see that I'm kind of a bridge builder in a way, you know, coming from the West, going to the Amazon, and then trying to bring these 2 cultures together, you know, the human rights camp, the animal rights camp, trying to bring these together. Well, then as an anarchist, seeing how much hatred there is of the police and trying to humanize that, like, look, we, the police, and us have a common enemy.
Right.
The police are not the enemy. So again, is there a way that we can rebuild this connection and help the police to wake up to what they've been made to be, what organization, what institution that they are a pawn of, so that together we can take a stand against the true slave masters, you know, the true enemy. So that happened. And then I've been coordinating this group of police who are really moral, truly wanting to do the right thing, but stuck inside this box that is preventing their voice to be heard because we love to hate cops. So that's been my cause, is to, as an activist, to advocate for nonviolent communication with the police and doing outreach to them.
Yeah.
And try, you know, to humanize that image and go see beyond that uniform.
Beautiful. I mean, it's just incredible because it's something that I've been doing too a lot. And I noticed the same things that you noticed, where it's like there's these people on one end and there's people on another end, and they're sort of like brought against each other, right? That's how they want it. It's easy. It's divide and conquer. But you know, when you look at it, a lot of people at the end of the day have like similar intentions, or they have similar goals. And I see this across, you know, when I went to political parties, I told you I would get, you know, shunned down sometimes, but there would be 1 or 2 individuals who did have empathy, who did care about me. And through my connections and meeting them, they learned more. I learned more. I was able to make connections and bring the right people together. And I've been
Yeah.
doing that. And I've been meeting with organizations that so many people in our community may be like, oh, well, I wouldn't want to get involved with them. I wouldn't want to, even try. But I've
Yeah.
tried it, because it's like watching a TV, like we said before, and being conscious rather than unconscious. We can see all the symbols. We can see what's being put in front of our faces. So
Yeah.
we're not really being manipulated as much.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
if we're unconscious of that and just taking it in, then yeah, of course, we're probably going to, take some messages and stuff that we probably don't want. We're not aware of it. So in the case of this, it's like I'm going in with an intention, not necessarily with an agenda, but with an open mind. And I would hope for them to have an open mind, right? And
Yeah.
you're looking at like this bigger picture, like we're just human beings at the end of the day, right? These are people in this party, that party, and this movement, that movement, this identity. I mean, it doesn't
Yeah.
matter. We're all human beings. So I think that's incredible because that's something that I've been doing a lot. And honestly, when you bring people together and the right people, magic happens. Like
Yes.
now literally I can sit back and it's like, wow, all these people are talking about stuff that I've talked about for years, and I didn't expect it, my own family or friends or what have you. And people always ask that question, like, how do you get your family to get involved or whatever? And one of the things I say is just be there for them, and just
Yeah.
just be there and bring people together and just show them the truth in action. I mean, you don't have to convince them or yell at them about it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I tried. It doesn't work.
So
Just love them and, just live your life and don't be apologetic for being different.
mm,
And just that presence, that liberated, you know, seeking for your mission and expressing your values, that's inspiring. And that's a contract. So when we're doing that, we're saying to life, this is what's giving me happiness. And so then that coding is there for others to discover as well. Okay, so if I allow myself to be authentic, if I trust myself, if I seek those things that truly call me in life, how that's attainable for me as well. So rather than being envious of others, it's an inspiration. When you see others truly expressing their purpose in life, that's the most inspiring thing. And so
yeah.
when there's people who have disagreements with you, the worst thing is to take yourself away from that, because your sphere of influence will then be removed and they won't get the chance to just bask in that inspiration. And we
Mhm.
all do it to each other. It's not like, oh, my job is to inspire everyone. No, I'm inspired constantly by the people that I'm with,
Mhm.
including those that I may see that they don't even share the same causes as myself,
Right.
but they all have something to teach. And this is something the natives, the indigenous, hold very dear in their worldview, is that everyone's a teacher. And
Mm.
that fundamental respect is what I see is lacking a lot, unfortunately, in our modern culture. It's that we don't give people the opportunity to show themselves. We're so quick to judge, based on X, Y, and Z and superficial things. But if we are respectful, we listen to each other, we give people a chance to explain themselves, then you get that gift of getting a glimpse into their inner world. And there's always something there that can teach us something too,
Yeah. Yeah, I see what you mean. And I want to sort of ask a question that I like to ask a lot of people too, is sort of like, okay, we have this individual action, which is, we need to be honest and understand ourselves and our environments. But is there some sort of need for a collective action for people to come together, for a movement to start, and not necessarily to get wrapped in that identity, but is that
Mm-hmm.
necessary to create more awareness around these issues, around this knowledge, is to create more of a movement? And is independent media really doing everything that they should be doing? Do you think there's more that they should be doing? Because, you're saying like, hey, don't be afraid if you need to express yourself. There's a lot of people in independent media who may just be consumers, following the news, following what's going on, and not putting out the content themselves.
Yeah.
And, what action are they taking? The question is to you, like, how do you feel about independent media and collective action?
Yeah. Collective action, I would say the priority would be for us to have that circle of trust in our lives, That would be where I would start, you know?
Yeah.
So thinking small, because then you can have the trust, then you can start building security for your personal life. And when you have your own home base covered, then you can start having energy available, focus available to invest into bigger causes. So if you're still trapped, you know, in a city that you hate, in a job that you hate, in relationships that don't feed you, then start there. Start first creating a life. You know, we are creators. That's a fundamental nature of a human being as an animal. We are creator beings, and life is the biggest creation we can have. So how do you create your life? Well, how do you create your everyday life? You start from your day and slowly shifting whatever you're doing to better be in alignment with your values. So that would be my number one priority. And then when you do that, you start attracting and finding people with similar value systems and similar priorities, similar interests. And then together you can start creating something to be in service for people. Because if you're alone, you can very easily end up being burnt out and getting even desperate. You know, one of my good friends, unfortunately, I witnessed him giving his entire life to activism and ended up killing himself because he had no space to receive. He was just giving in his entire life, and he ended up burning out from that. So I would say number one is to create a life where you feel supported and your activism is respected and valued. So find those people in your life. And then together you can start co-creating things. And what I mean by that is, you know, whatever it is that is your passion, if it's your passion to teach people how to grow their own food, then you can start doing that, you know, start with yourself, grow your own food, and then maybe you can start doing workshops. You can maybe even open up some sort of community garden and start having other people practicing how to do that as well. Or let's say you have a passion to teach natural law. Well, why don't you start your own course or workshops or webinars or even meetings, physical meetings where you invite people and you stream documentaries and you have conversations or book clubs. There's just so many different things that people can do. But I think if we start from looking at our own immediate circle of people and our own personal lives, that's the most holistic, the most supportive way that we can create change.
Right.
And when you have that foundation, then yes, you know, start, if you feel called to put on some sort of, you know, greater influence and start pushing internationally, then good, you have your support network and you've already figured out your own kind of personal priorities and your own freedom. So start there, I would say. And when it comes to the media, yeah, a lot of us consume a lot, but don't necessarily put that much information out there. And that can create a kind of sense of paralysis. Again, this information saturation. So my remedy for that would be maybe try and just start talking to people before even making any content or creating media, but just try and talk to people and see how that works for you. You know, maybe you say a couple of things to someone in a shop or, you know, in a local post office, or see how it feels to start expressing yourself. And then that confidence that starts to build when you feel that, wait a minute, actually human beings are not as scary as I thought. And that in real life, they're nowhere near as prejudiced and, I don't know, arsy as they are online. Then you start having a lot more faith in humanity as well. This has happened to me. And this is why I love street activism. If I had to choose one method over the other, I would say actual outreach on the streets. I prefer to online activism. Yeah.
Me too. Yeah. Really good tips, honestly, for a lot of people. Recently, I put out a video with like a bunch of resources for people, you know, flyers and brochures and business cards and all this stuff, but it still relies on the individual, right? And what they want to do. And they got to figure out what kind of works for them and experiment a bit. So I appreciate those tips because they're very, you know, it's like, hey, you got to do something, you got to try something and sort of figure it out. And so I want to go back to this like image that you provided for the audience, because I think this is a really important image, just to sort of sum up a lot of what we've talked about, right? And talking about honesty and integrity, because this is at the core of things. Like you said, sort of like that mental state that you had was what led to everything else. And I
Yeah.
think what we're talking about when it comes to truth and morality, these and freedom, and a lot of writers of the past said, hey, this is a mental state. Freedom is
Yeah.
a mental state. And so let's talk about this. It says it's not about the safety of our vessels, it's about the integrity of our souls,
Mhm.
right? So when you say souls, what do you mean by that?
Yeah. The core reality of your being, who
Hmm.
you are, you know, that presence. We all at the core of, if you're asked to feel into how are you, how you feeling, you know, there is something that speaks back to you. And I would say the voice of the soul is also the voice of conscience. You know, when you're about to do a thing that maybe is not in alignment with your highest self, with your soul, you feel that message. Or you may get an encouragement. Go, say something. Now's your opportunity. Do it. Or even pick up the umbrella. It's going to rain today. You know, when we get those very subtle inner guidance messages coming through, that's your higher self. That's your soul. That's your, you know, true being.
I would have to agree with that because there was a time where I wasn't producing content for months
Yeah.
on end, and that may not seem like a big deal to a lot of people, but for me, it was. I felt it, and I was like,
Yeah.
"Where is this feeling coming from?" It's not from. It didn't feel like it was from my conscience. It felt even deeper. It felt like a feeling. I was like, "This is something really strange," right? And
Yeah.
I was at conflict with myself because things are going on in my life, and there were things preventing me, and I was like, "Wait." This just doesn't seem right. So
Yeah.
I identified it as a soul as well. And whatever
Mhm.
people want to perceive of it, I think as long as they understand what you're trying to represent here, it's like this is
Yeah.
it being integral to yourself, right? We can even just
Yes.
say the
Yourself.
self.
Yes, exactly.
The self, right? Or
Yourself.
yeah,
The most like purest, most crystallized, beautiful core self that you
right.
are, that you know you are. And that's
Hmm.
why we get things like shame and guilt, because we know we've gone against that.
Right.
Because we deep inside, we do know who we are and we do know our value, and we do know that we're worthy of love and respect. That's what a lot of these so-called negative emotions are about, is a communication when something's broken a boundary, when something isn't in alignment with our soul.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And I just noticed for your logo as well, you mentioned an eagle before, right? Flew by. You have
Yeah.
is that a dove for your
That's a
logo?
dove, yeah. Dove
To
of
represent,
peace.
like, peace, yeah, okay.
Yes, yeah.
Do you know a lot
Not
about
peace in the
birds?
lame kind of a hippie way, you know,
Yeah.
but peace in a way of total liberation,
Mm,
because it comes after, you
right.
know. It's a gift that you get when you're free. You get peace.
Well, I like these questions that you ask. You say, "How do you act when nobody is watching? Do you take what does not belong to you? Do you speak the truth to yourself and others? And where do you set your boundaries?"
Hmm.
So, are these questions that people should really reflect on to sort of detail their own integrity?
Yes, yes. To really refine their moral compass.
Hmm.
And then when we begin to honor that and know that it is a form of loving yourself, when you do begin to honor that, then you will see that your life will have a lot less conflict. Because if we harbor inner conflict, if we are constantly doing things that are not in alignment with our actual values, that just becomes magnified in our everyday life, because this creation, this universe is always wanting us to grow to our highest potential, to live in our true nature. And so if we harbor conflicts inside, gracefully, life will show it to us by putting a lot of conflicts on our way. And it's not a magical thing. It's just the way the world works. This is natural law. This is cause and effect, law of correspondence. So if you are in alignment with yourself, it's amazing, because you start seeing people who are in alignment coming to you. You start seeing events in your life align and doors open and things start getting smoother. Your path starts to get smoother. I can say that in my personal life, I used to attract a lot of hazardous events. I was always breaking some sort of a bone, falling down. I don't know, just all sorts of strange, freakish things were happening to me. And I just thought, I'm just so unlucky. But actually, when I began my ceremonial healing with ayahuasca, I came to recognize a very deep program of self-loathing,
Hmm.
and that I was actively hating myself. And this is related to a lot of trauma, of course. But when I began to work on the trauma and began to practice true respect for myself, meaning no longer abusing myself, no longer lying, no longer hiding things from other people or myself, becoming transparent, open, loving, respectful, sincere, then those accidents stopped. And it was
Right.
incredible to see, like, wow, that was simply just a reflection of how much I was harming myself, that kept happening to me.
Huh. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the importance of being conscious, right? I mean, or having a conscience, either one. I mean, because we could be doing harm and we don't realize it, right? Just like again, plugging into that TV and not realizing what it's doing. I mean, so it's really important we evaluate not just our food choices, right, but the information we conceive, everything,
Yeah.
right? So,
Everything.
so
Exactly.
is there anything else that you really want to deliver as a message to the rest of the world? Because we have about like 5 minutes left here. And so, is there anything you really want to speak about in relation to what's going on in the current world and what you really want people to know about? I really appreciate all your efforts with action and truth. I mean, I like the fact that you really go over both. There's a lot of people who might miss one or the other, and so I really like the fact that you're also bridging communities together. Is there anything that you want to share with the audience before we sort of wrap it up?
Well, I guess the core thing for me is trust. I think it's time that we start trusting each other. And for us to do that, I think we need to start going out and meeting each other in the real world more. Take a
Mm.
chance. Get in touch with your activist friend that you really like and say, "Hey, could we meet up? I'm willing to travel 5 hours to come and meet you. Let's go for a coffee or let's go for a hike or whatever." I think we really start, like, this is an opportunity for us to start getting out of this virtual connection and get into a true human heart to heart connection. And when you have that, it just gives you so much more trust and faith in your future as well, because you have people that that you could take a bullet for. I think this is the most important thing right now, is that we have true relationships, connection with people that we can really, really trust. And when you have that, it takes just a lot of that fear and insecurity away from your actions and from your life. So I would
Yeah.
just, yeah, that would be my invitation, is start meeting people in the real world more, and see if you can take your activism on the streets as well,
Right.
with questions, with signs, with flyers, and you can make it not a protest, but simply like you're manifesting, you're
Right.
informing, you're inspiring people. You don't have to be fighting against anybody. You could just simply say, "Hey, have you heard of the Agenda 2030? This is what we do." You just
Right.
ask a couple of simple questions, and well, a lot of people actually haven't heard about it. So this
Mm.
is a really fruitful ground now to share information, to help people equip themselves to respond better to what's coming
Yeah.
and prepare themselves.
And people will come to you, right? The right people will come to you according to the information if they really are interested. Like I said to you, I
Yes.
mean, I found people and then I brought them over there and then I brought these other people from over here, and now everybody's together and everybody sort of shares this common goal of like, yeah, we realize we understand the root cause of the problem and we understand what needs to be done. There's a lot of
Yes.
people who may not want to, but that's okay.
Yeah.
We're going to create it ourselves. We can do it, for the people who
Yes.
are ready. And when they're ready, they may come our way, because that's what happens. It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
they're ready and they realize like, wait, you were right, or you were warning us and what we're doing is not actually productive, they might actually start to listen to you. They might start to come back to you and say sorry or whatever. And I see it all the time, and just in
Yeah.
common relationships, right? People are like, man, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done this, I shouldn't have done that. So it's interesting, but that regret sort of comes as a natural progression of regress, right? So to realize, like, wait, if we're going to continue to evolve, we need to get past this and move forward. So I think that's a stage with the world too, right? I mean, we're in a
Yeah.
state of, well, our freedoms are questioned, everything's that questioned, like you said. So it's a matter of, well, are we going to keep moving down that path, or are we going to realize that and then evolve. So I appreciate you for sharing that and being a part of this great evolution for humanity. I encourage everybody checks out your works. Henna Maria, thank you very much for joining me. Dawnofpeace.org. So dawnofpeace.org, and then hennamaria.community. Okay, so hennamaria.community, and then policeforfreedom.org. Okay, so policeforfreedom.org. That is the one about the police and how you kind of got them involved into going after these ideas, which I think is incredible that you're doing that, because again, they're all human beings. There's no reason, I have nothing against them. If I may be against who they represent to be, but that's because they're no longer trying to be human beings. But if they are themselves, and at the end of the day, if I'm looking at who they are, they're human beings. So I'm going to respect them as such. I'm not gonna lie to myself, right, and say, well, they are this thing because they make themselves out to be that thing. I'm going to get right to the truth. They are a human being.
Exactly. And I've got an exciting project. I'm coordinating a group of natural law teachers and advisors inside Police for Freedom so that we can start creating content that would enlighten both activists and police on our natural rights and how do we actually better defend our rights according to that. So
beautiful.
That's the core quest for me, is to help bring the truth of how even the justice system is a complete fraud. It's an injustice system, and how the joinder happens when you communicate with the police. How do you protect your rights as you speak? Because there's a saying that the pen is mightier than the sword, but the word is mightier than the pen. So if we can learn how to speak with consciousness and with respect, even to those people who are unfortunately been made as pawns of tyranny, that engagement there can facilitate perhaps the awakening and, embodiment of true humanity in the other. So if we have that faith in us, that we approach people with this intention, that maybe we can, show them that there's another way, it becomes possible. If we never do that, it's not going to ever be possible.
Right.
So I think we're going to need a lot more bridge builders like you and I, Corey, out there to see where's the polarity, where's the division, and go there in the middle and say, okay, guys, come and talk. Let's talk.
I even interviewed, for the summit, I interviewed somebody who is an ex-police, for over 30 years. I mean, he did everything, martial arts and all this stuff. And I mean, he's a great guy. His name is Daniel Arnold. I recommend people checking it out. But yeah, it's amazing to bring these people together just for this event. And I thank you for joining this event. And I encourage anybody else to check out all the other speakers as well. Thank you very much, Henna, for joining me for this event. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Corey. I really loved the chat with you.
Thank you, everybody, for watching. This is the End of Slavery Summit. I'm Corey Angelat. Again, check out Henna Maria and her works. Thank you very much for watching. Take care.
All right, so that was Henna Maria, everybody. And as you see, we're starting up the next one. The next one is Aaron Nebbia. Well, before I get into that, welcome, mandatory myocarditis. I always laugh saying your name. Shine, welcome back to the stream as well. You guys are always hanging out. Obviously, the streams are not going too crazy with viewers, but I don't expect it to, because still not many people know about it, and it's really just the people who follow me on my individual channel. But there's tons of people who are in the summit and they don't even sometimes know about my channel. They're mostly following the content. In fact, there's actually more people sign up for the summit than there's actual people subscribed to my channel, so that tells you something. But all that matters is that the message gets out there. And the streams, of course, is just for outreach. So I know somebody messaged me yesterday. They're like, man, you got to get more people on your live streams. I'm like, hey, man, doing what I can. It's not much I can do. Zero respect for cops, but if they can be awakened, then great. Really tough to get through them. Yeah, there's a lot of people. It's going to be very tough to get through, right? And it's going to take a lot of time. obviously. I mean, as did with the end of chattel slavery, except this is way bigger. I mean, that's why they were talking about it at the time as well. That being said, it's something that we still see as most necessary to talk about, for sure. We see how it's helping people in their individual lives as well, just sharing this knowledge, their own awareness, their own empowerment. And, you know, along those lines, there's going to be a lot more work from me and others to talk about bringing health into the picture. Very, very important. So thank you guys for hanging out. The next one, like I said, is Aaron Nebia. Now, what he talks about is psychedelics, or what you may call entheogens. Really the only talk on the summit about this subject. You know, all of day 12 is pretty unique if you think about it. You know, you got Hannah Maria talking about spirituality, Aaron talking about entheogens, and then Bridget Kaiser Sherman talking about economics. Very unique subjects for this day. And Aaron goes into detail here. I challenge him quite a bit because I'm not an individual who personally has any experience or really wants to have any experience with entheogens. But after this interview I did with him, and I asked him, you know, genuine questions, really questions that I was even curious about, I started to see that there could be value for different individuals. Not that there's value in it for everybody, but as you will see for yourself, there definitely is a value. Otherwise, nature really wouldn't provide it for us, and there wouldn't be so much changes happening from it. So you'll see for yourself, and you can judge for yourself. I ask all the different challenging questions here that comes to mind when it comes to this subject. Maybe you guys have some personal experience as well. And again, for everybody who's out there watching who's silent, because some of you are out there who do that, or the people who are watching the video after the live stream is done, thank you for watching, and thank you for staying tuned. Here we go, Aaron Nebia, everybody.
Hello and welcome. This is Corey Angelat. Welcome to the End of Slavery Summit. I'm here with a very special guest, somebody who is going to talk about a subject that a lot of people may have experience with and a lot of other people may not have experience with. Some people may say this is a really powerful thing. Other people may say, well, wait, this is something I don't know if I want to get into. But we're going to talk all about it and see its role and time and place in our use for trying to get to freedom. This is a process, and sometimes we might need some assistance to getting there, whether it's individually or collectively. I am joined here by Aaron Nebia, right? Did I say your name correctly?
That's right. Yeah.
All right. And could you give an introduction to the audience about yourself, and why is it that we're going to talk about psychedelics and why you think it's important?
Okay. Yeah. So my name is Aaron, and so yeah, I chose the topic because I mean, there's a lot of important topics that have to be talked about for where we're at in our world and how to get out of the situation we're in. But to me, the real root problem of all the problems we see in the world is the state of consciousness that human beings are in, because you know, the internal worlds is where the external world comes from. You know, the collective state of mind that people are in, that's what results in the world we see around us, because behavior comes from level of consciousness. And I don't think it's too hard to look around and see that the average people out there are not in the highest state of consciousness. I mean, there's different grades of it. There's people who are obviously doing a lot of evil and oppressing our world a lot. And then there's also the vast majority of people that are in kind of a state of apathy, or just not even really seeing the fact that they're enslaved in many ways and brainwashed in many ways, and how limited the human mind has become through the conditioning in society, the media, school, and so-called entertainment and all of that. And I think it's all about coming back to basics, like asking the most basic questions, like, who are we? What is our purpose here? What does it mean to be a human? What is consciousness itself? What is the creator, God, however you see that? I think these most fundamental questions are the most important things I think that's the most important starting place. And you're not going to get that through education. I mean, religion will give you a very watered down version. So I think a lot of the older religions and spiritual traditions were much closer to the truth, but obviously they've become corrupted over time and used more for control purposes than anything else. So these plant compounds that have been on the planet with us for millions of years that cultures all over the world have been using, they've been used in shamanism and lots of different spiritual traditions. And there's even evidence that a lot of the earliest religious texts probably came from the use of entheogens, also known as psychedelics. We've lost touch with that over time, of course, but these compounds are something that are very stigmatized in our modern day culture. And I think that's because they're a threat to the control system we're under, because the control system depends on us not asking the important questions and not knowing our true nature.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it has to do with that saying that we're not human beings having a spiritual experience, we're spiritual beings having a human experience. I think if we were aware of our true divine nature, our true spiritual nature, we would never tolerate a lot of the control and manipulation that we're under. And also, being in an expanded state of consciousness allows you to see where you've been brainwashed and manipulated when you might not have seen it before. You've kind of just been going along with the program, as they say. And these compounds are something that encourages you to step outside like your preconditioned ways of thinking and beliefs that you've been taught. All of a sudden, you might start asking, like, well, are these things they told us in school really true? Did history really happen the way they told us? Like, maybe I should look into it for myself. Is the media really telling the truth? You know, I used to just think of the news as the news, like whatever's going on in the world, they're telling it. The question of are they lying to us or who's controlling it, that had never ever even entered my mind until the first time that I tried psychedelics in college. And then all of a sudden I was asking those kinds of questions, like who's controlling these narratives and for what reason?
Wow.
What about our food? Is our food really fit for human consumption? And these are a lot of different topics, but I mean, you kind of start asking about all these most basic things. I also kind of see the red pill in the Matrix movie as being very similar to what psychedelics are in concept.
Yeah. So there's a lot of people that I know, not just yourself, who've told me, said, hey, you know, these psychedelics and these different substances I've tried have actually made me more aware of my environment and more aware of what has gone on. And I've seen it, you know, face to face, or they find a deeper part of themselves, and it teaches them lessons that they don't normally see. So you mentioned, you know, the important role entheogens play in liberating the mind and cultivating both internal and external freedom. So, as a complete like novice to this, myself and maybe many others who are watching, I mean, are these psychedelic compounds found all over nature, or where are they found in nature? How are they manifested into our
They,
reality?
they are pretty much found everywhere in nature. Different continents have different ones that are more common in each one. That's why, like, if you look at the different traditions around the world, you'll see very psychedelic looking artwork. Like the Mayans were big on psilocybin mushrooms, and also Salvia divinorum was another big one for them. Or if you look at the Siberian shamans, they were very into the Amanita muscaria. That's actually where the Santa Claus legend comes from, and that's why he's red and white like that mushroom. That's kind of a whole other story to get into. The African tribes, a lot of them used iboga. In the jungles of South America, there's ayahuasca, and psilocybin mushrooms are common pretty much all over the world. You can find them just about everywhere. But I mean, I've always thought it's pretty clear when you look at nature that there's whatever you believe God or creator is, there's some kind of order behind everything and consciousness behind everything. Because when you look at like how everything keeps each other in balance, everything has a purpose. You know, the wolf population keeps the deer population in check. and then they keep the plant population in check so nothing gets out of it. Seems like humans are the ones that kind of imbalance everything.
Yeah.
So I think the fact that these plants are here, I think that's another sign that there is some force of good out there that's trying to aid our evolution. You could just see it as a manifestation of nature itself trying to prod us along and get us to evolve. Terence McKenna, I think, talks about one theory that the first psychedelic mushroom spores might have come here on a comet a long time. I haven't looked too deeply into that theory, but and then the other big one is DMT. That's actually kind of the most central one, because every single life form on the planet, maybe even in the whole rest of the universe too, but at least on this planet, every form of life, like every human being and every blade of grass, everything has this compound in it. So,
Yeah.
and DMT is the most potent psychedelic that exists. So the fact that a psychedelic chemical, it seems to be one of the most central common components of all life, to me, that says something. And from what I know about DMT, and psychedelics in general, but especially DMT, since our own body creates it, it seems like it has a lot to do with our perception itself, and even opening up our perception to what you might call higher dimensions beyond just the 5 sense world that we perceive around us all the time. The whole idea that like what we see, feel, and smell and hear, that's all there is. A lot of people, I think, know deep down inside that there's something more than what we see, but they also know, scientists acknowledge that we only use a small portion of our brains at a time. And one of the slides I actually put up for this presentation is the one showing the image of a brain scan.
Yeah.
And so there are ways for the whole brain to be used at once, not just one small part of it at a time. So I think it makes sense maybe that if certain areas of the brain are connected that aren't normally connected, then in those moments, maybe we can perceive more than we normally would. And instead of thinking of them as hallucinogens, because that's what society thinks of them as, is, you take these things and you hallucinate, you see things that aren't there. I see it more as something that removes filters, and the things that you see and perceive and think of that you wouldn't normally, they're just layers of reality that normally were closed off to, and now are becoming opened up to them through these compounds. So that's the role I think they play. And as far as freedom, since if they have the ability to help free your perception and create internal freedom, then like I was saying, your consciousness, the collective consciousness of everyone determines the world around us. So the more people who find internal freedom, the more external freedom in the world will have too.
Right. Right. Yeah, it is a process of the self, and I've gone into that with a lot of other speakers. So, and before we kind of get into this slide, because I really like the fact that you provided this study, it's very interesting. Before we get into that, I'm curious. So, there's a lot of different substances out there, and all sorts of things. Some psychedelics, some not, right, or whatever. And it seems to me like some things can be good, but they could be used for bad, right? Or people can take what is good and ultimately twist it or use it for bad purposes. So can psychedelics, or these things that we talk about here, can they be dangerous? Are they for everybody?
That's always an important thing to look at with anything. Any powerful tool can be a double-edged sword. I mean, it's like that with firearms. You can use one to save your life or your family's life, or you can use it to go murder a bunch of innocent people. Yeah. So, I mean, psychedelics, they can have bad use. Usually it's not deliberate bad use. It would be somebody jumping into it who doesn't have the right understanding of what they really are and what they're for. If you see something like LSD or mushrooms or ayahuasca as a party drug, and you think, oh, I'm going to take this and go have a blast at a party, you're probably not going to have the greatest time, and you could even have a really terrible experience. The people who freak out or supposedly like do crazy dangerous stuff on them, hurt themselves and others, I think those are mostly people who they're either not in a good place mentally to do it in the first place, but I think it usually has to do with what they call set and setting. That's a common term in the world of psychedelic use. Actually, it means mindset and setting as in your external, and so basically your internal and external environment. The state of mind you're in when you do it, where you are, who you're around, and the dosage you take, of course, and most importantly, understanding what these things are really for. They're for spiritual growth, and they might uncover a lot of inner demons and shadows that might be very uncomfortable to look at. If you know that you're going into it for that reason, then it can be great for healing. But if you're not expecting that and it just comes at you out of nowhere and you don't realize that it's a spiritual tool and that everything you're experiencing is coming from you, it can be really terrifying and out of control then. And that's the other thing too, is if a experience with it is really intense and you try to control it, that's the biggest mistake. The whole idea is to surrender to it, whatever's going on. And if you try to fight the experience, you're really just fighting what your own subconscious is trying to present to you, and that's going to make the experience worse. So I would say, yeah, they can definitely be used incorrectly. The most important thing to do is research. I would say read as many people's experiences with them as possible, maybe on a website like Erowid.com, or just go to YouTube and type in like mushroom trip report, DMT trip report, things like that. If you listen to enough of them, I would listen to the ones that say good trips and bad trips. That way you understand the full range of what they can do and know better how to prepare yourself for it ahead of time.
Right, and you have resources for everybody, so they can kind of look more into this that we'll get into toward the end here. That'll be, of course, really helpful for a lot of people. So yeah, thank you for answering the question. I think it is a situation like anything else. If it's powerful, it's something that can help the world, that it's got to be used responsibly. And so yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, that makes sense. So let's look at this slide that you provide about the study. It says the first ever study on LSD using brain imaging technology. Now, before we continue here, what is LSD? Could you kind of fill us in on that?
It stands for lysergic acid diethylamide. It's actually LSA is the original chemical found in nature. It's actually found in rye ergot, a fungus that grows on rye. But if you use it in that form, just take ergo straight, it's also poisonous. But that is how people first discovered it. And the scientist that actually first discovered LSD discovered it by accident. His name was Albert Hofmann. He was actually he never even really knew about psychedelics or anything, and that's not what he was looking for. He was looking for a cure for cluster headaches, and he was seeing if some kind of derivative of the ergo fungus could do that. And he tried a bunch of different experiments. This one chemical he came up with that he thought was useless happened to be LSD, and he just kind of set it on a shelf and didn't think much of it, thought it was really just a failed experiment. And then he actually says in his own writings that one day, like some voice inside him kind of nudged him to go revisit that chemical. He ended up getting some on his skin, and he didn't expect any mind-altering effects to happen, but that was the world's first true LSD trip. That day was April 19th. I forget what year it was, but April 19th is known as Bicycle Day now, because after he got some of it on his skin, he rode his bike ride home. He talks about like how the world around him completely transforms on his bike ride, and he had no idea what it was from, but he eventually figured out it was from that chemical. And then from there, like, his life was changed. He became a very spiritual person, and he ended up using small doses of it pretty much every day as an antidepressant, not like full-blown high doses that would produce a psychedelic effect, but what you'd call a microdose. So anyway, that's where LSD came from originally. And I mean, if you do believe in some sort of God or creator or angels or spirit guides or some kind of, you know, unseen force that guides us along, I would tend to think that the discovery of this wasn't really an accident. It was probably some kind of divine intervention, or maybe benevolent ET intervention, or something that guided him to discover this chemical when he didn't even consciously know that's what he was doing. But I think it was because the world really needed that breakthrough at the time.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Wow. Thanks for sharing that. Do you want to present the slide going over the study and kind of break it down if you want?
Sure. So it wasn't the first ever study on LSD at all, but it was the first one using brain imaging technology, since that's a pretty modern technology. It was in 2016 at the Beckley Imperial Research Program. Okay, so the first ever study on LSD using brain imaging technology was conducted in 2016 at Oxford by scientists Robin Carhart Harris and David Nutt. So in this experiment, 20 volunteers were given either 75 micrograms of LSD or a placebo. And that's not even that high of a dose, by the way, but it's definitely enough to give noticeable effects. And then they underwent brain scans during this. So the 20 people, each of them either had a placebo or the real thing. And the image you see on the left are the people who had the placebo, and then the image on the right, that's the brain scan of someone while they were under the effects of LSD. And you can see that a lot more areas of the brain are communicating and are active at one time than what you would normally see. Normally you'd see like one area light up, then another, then another. You don't really see the whole brain lit up all at once like that, except in this situation. Or the other time you see this is when they've done brain scans of like very experienced meditators, like Buddhist monks or people who have been meditating for decades. And because you can reach these states naturally, that's also important to know. A lot of people say like, oh, you don't need these chemicals because you can get there naturally, but I think both things are important, because these chemicals can show you what's possible and inspire you to go on that journey of getting there yourself. But let me see here. So in the study, it says the way that this worked is that LSD decreases communication between the brain regions that make up the default mode network, a collection of hub centers that work together to control and repress consciousness. Like the conductor in an orchestra, the DMN polices the amount of sensory information that enters our sphere of awareness and has been described as the neural correlate of the ego. So that's like a filter, basically. You know, our minds, whether our minds were designed naturally that way, or maybe, you know, they were conditioned over time that way. There's a lot of theories about that, but one way or the other, in our modern day, our minds filter out most of the information coming in all the time. So this sort of it lifts that filter, and I would say the higher dose you take, the more filters are removed. Kind of like opening the nozzle on a hose wider and wider, or turning up voltage on an electrical line.
Right.
The DMN, which is the part of the brain that filters consciousness, disintegrates under LSD, allowing for a magnificent increase in communication between brain networks that are normally highly segregated. So that's probably where the consciousness expanding effects come from, because if parts of the brain are communicating that wouldn't normally, then you might start connecting dots in your life that you wouldn't normally connect, or maybe some problem that you've been trying to figure out for months or years, all of a sudden it just clicks when you're not even trying to figure it out. Or, you know, something about the way the world works, like, why is this way, or why is that, like, suddenly it'll make sense. That can be an experience a lot of people have.
Right.
So this produces a more integrated pattern of connectivity throughout the entire brain, which may be associated with more fluid modes of cognition. This could have major implications for LSD-assisted psychotherapy, as it indicates how the drug allows patients to break free from the rigid modes of cognition and thought that underlie hard-to-treat conditions such as depression and addiction. So, yeah, basically, like it's saying here, it has the ability to help a person break free of, their normal, familiar, kind of hardwired thought patterns, beliefs, things like that, and um, whether someone has an addiction or an unhealthy belief system, or they're just really brainwashed from education or media or something, and this has the ability to break through all of that and get you to question what you've believed, or even see yourself in a new way. As far as breaking addiction, like that's a whole other topic that could probably be an hour interview in itself. But LSD was actually part of the original AA type of program when it first came out, and the success rates with breaking people's alcoholism and other types of addictions were much higher when they were using this component. And a lot of people today still go for ayahuasca ceremonies in the jungle or iboga, things like that, as like a last resort when they've tried everything else to overcome an addiction. And it actually has the highest percentage rate of success for any kind of addiction treatment out there that we know of.
So, you say it's an addiction treatment. I mean, would this cause an addiction itself, or no?
It doesn't tend to, because it's such an intense experience. It's not the type of thing somebody would probably be in a rush to do over and over again. I mean, doing it every day wouldn't be practical. And there's also a thing with psychedelics where tolerance builds up pretty much overnight. So if you take, say, 75 micrograms one day, in order to get this
sorry. Your audio is...
the next day you'll have to take twice that much.
One second. Your audio is a little weird right now.
Oh.
Okay, now it's better.
How is it now?
Repeat what you just said, the dosage.
Okay. Yeah, so psychedelics, whether it's mushrooms, LSD, most of them have a tolerance thing where, like, your tolerance will literally double overnight. So you might be able to do it 2 days in a row, maybe 3, but you'll have to increase the dosage each time you do it. If you get to like day 4 of trying to do it daily, like, it'll just stop working pretty much at that point. So it's pretty much impossible for most people to get addicted to these things. If anyone did find themselves addicted, it would be a psychological addiction, not a physical addiction, because you can get psychologically addicted to any kind of experience that you enjoy, whether it's playing video games or anything, food. So I guess in theory, somebody could find themselves psychologically addicted to this.
Yeah.
But it's not common. I've seen people say things like, "Oh, so if you go and take ayahuasca to overcome a heroin addiction, you're trading one drug abuse for another," and it's like, no, that's not how it works at all. Because something like heroin or alcohol, I mean, people who are addicted tend to do those on a daily basis, and it destroys their lives, and it's completely out of control for them. This is something you can do one time in a therapeutic session, and then the unhealthy addiction can be gone forever. Or, maybe you need like a yearly revisit to it or something. But and there's also no evidence that these psychedelics, at least not the traditional psychedelics, cause any kind of lasting brain damage. Or there's a lot of myths out there, things like flashbacks and storing in your spine, and it can cause you to go crazy, or if you crack your back, you'll start tripping again. A lot of those are just propaganda, like reefer madness type of propaganda, basically.
Yeah. I was going to ask about that. Like, is there bad advice that's out there that, you want to warn people about? Because I would imagine if there's something that is this powerful, that there are people out there who are trying to discredit it, or a lot of, so-called scientists who are trying to push it down, right? And use other things and other forms of chemicals which aren't so natural, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, there's tons of people still who are very against it. Who most of them have probably never tried it themselves. They have a complete misunderstanding of about what it is. They're used. I mean, they were taught that it's just another drug, so
Right.
I mean, they'll see it as being lumped into the same category as heroin, crack, and meth. And I mean, and it really couldn't be more opposite than those things.
Yeah.
So there are people who give bad advice about it just from
Well, what
ignorance.
makes it different between those things? Like, just to clarify for people.
Well, most of those drugs you hear about, they're very destructive. I mean, they can be destructive and addictive from the first time you try them. Things like crystal meth or heroin. I mean, most people who get into those things, their lives get destroyed pretty quickly, or if they're able to turn themselves around, it's not easy to do it at all. But
So you're saying like this has opposite effects, basically. Instead of destroying people's lives, it can technically uplift them.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there could be a way this could destroy someone's life if they used it irresponsibly.
Right.
Like if somebody took a really high, like a way higher dosage than they ever should have, and they did it at a party around, or walked through some kind of dangerous neighborhood or something while they were under the influence. Like if somebody had a really traumatizing enough experience from it and then they didn't process that experience right, I mean, it could cause a post-traumatic stress disorder, just like any traumatic experience could, like being in a war or anything like that. So when you hear about flashbacks, it's not that the chemical is still in you and getting activated again. It's that it's kind of like when people have war flashbacks or something, like any kind of traumatic experience can pop up from some kind of trigger like that. And you can have a pretty traumatic experience from these chemicals if you're not prepared for it. If you don't do your research first, if you take more at a time than you're ready for, or you're not in the right setting when you do it. But yeah, these definitely don't belong in the category of all those destructive drugs you hear about. It's hard to even call them drugs, actually.
So is LSD a lot like DMT in the same way it has effects, or is it different? Do they come from same sources?
They're all a little bit different in experience. They all have certain things in common. Like they all expand consciousness. So you know how on a radio there's a dial with tons of different frequencies you can tune into. My theory is kind of that the universe has tons of dimensions, and so do we within ourselves. And I think each of these chemicals is like a different key for a different door, basically. Like maybe each one tunes you into a different level of reality. That's the only way I can think of to describe it, because they all have similarities, but they all have differences also. DMT is completely natural, and the closest thing to DMT, other than DMT, is probably psilocybin, which is what's in psychedelic mushrooms. It's hard to really describe the differences between these experiences in words, because it's hard to describe the experience in words at all, really. You can read people's testimonies all day long and get a pretty good idea of what these things do, but the only way to really understand what the experience is to experience it yourself. It would be kind of like trying to describe the difference between red and orange to someone who was born blind. But you can describe it to a degree, but they're not going to get the full picture of what it's like just by reading or hearing about it. So.
Yeah, I would imagine there's some difficulty around this topic just because of all the many different things out there. But DMT, you said, is like the most natural. So LSD, is it found all over nature as well?
No, LSD was synthesized in a laboratory by Albert Hofmann, but it was somewhat derived from the ergo fungus. The chemical in ergo fungus was LSA. I'm not a chemist, so I don't know the exact differences, but I think LSD is basically like an analog of LSA. LSA is also found in morning glory seeds and Hawaiian baby wood rose seeds, but people who have experienced both usually say that LSD is a much cleaner and more pleasant experience. And something else I wanted to say about it is, in the in the truth seeking community, how you see a lot of times like infighting going on, like people arguing about different topics, and that's because that the truth movement is very contaminated also with half truths or outright deceptions by government agents or people in power who are targeting people in the truth movement and giving what sounds like true conspiracies or true conspiracy theories or whatever, but they're actually false to kind of poison the whole movement, control people, get people in the movement to argue. And
Right.
one of those things you'll hear a lot of times when you talk about this is like, oh, LSD was created by the CIA as a mind control weapon. And that's sort of one of those half-truth things because they didn't create it, but they tried to use it as a mind control weapon. They were doing experiments on American civilians, like giving them ridiculously high dosages to see how they would react. And they were also doing some pretty cruel experiments on people in laboratory settings using it, trying to use it to brainwash people or program them. And it didn't really work for that. When they gave people these crazy dosages of it, it kind of just messed them up. It didn't do what they were looking for. So that was in the laboratory setting. But then their hope with giving it out to the public in mass amounts was that they would kind of be able to put the public under a spell and put them under mind control, and actually ended up doing the exact opposite of what they wanted. All these hundreds of thousands of young people started taking it, and instead of becoming more brainwashed in programs, they broke out of their programming and started seeing just how corrupt and deceptive the system has always been. I mean, that's where all the Vietnam War protests started from, because people were saying like, hey, wait a minute, like what if our government isn't telling us the truth about what we're doing over there? And what if we really are just over there harming and killing innocent people for the greed of some psychopaths in power who don't even have our own interests at heart?
Yeah.
Because
I don't think it's a coincidence you say they're a psychopath and we're talking about psychedelics, and we're talking about how there's people, a mass amount of people who suffer from all sorts of mental problems. It
yeah.
seems to me like there's a connection being built. Like,
Well,
not between the psychedelics causing the psychopaths. I'm saying the psychedelics being able to help a lot of what's going on, the mental problems.
oh, for sure. Well, I mean, I think some of the people who are in so-called power, I say so-called power because it's really an illusion. Like these people who consider themselves are world rulers, or most of us consider them the world rulers, they don't really have more power than we do. It's our belief and their belief in their position of power that gives it any real power. So
well,
we're really just handing our power over to them on a mass scale. And I think if more people started expanding their consciousness, less of us would be doing that, because we would realize like this power structure is an illusion. It is a lie. Like these people who say they're our rulers, they're not any different than us, really. They don't have any more right to rule the rest of us than any of us do. There's nothing godlike about them that puts them in that position. So
right.
Why are we doing what they say and listening to them? Why aren't we just tapping into our own conscience for ourselves, or following our hearts, or
Yeah, and I wouldn't actually be surprised if some people in power were taking these substances just to see some things that they can use against others and prevent them from taking those substances, right? So I'm sure there's cases and exceptions here and there, and there's always going to be people everywhere who are taking this stuff. And the question is how much of the public knows about it. And I don't think a lot people know about it. I don't even know about it, right? So that's my question as well. Like, so what about people like myself, somebody who, like, I can sit down, I can contemplate, or I can meditate, or I can think and reflect about the world. Do I need these substances, or is it more so for the person who is really rigid in their belief system and they can't escape things, and they're really set on their worldview, and they say, no, that's wrong, we're not enslaved, or
Yeah. Well, those are the people who need it the most, I would say. But I really think anyone, no matter what point they're at on their journey, could benefit from it if they use it correctly. I think, like, however far along you are, there's always further to go. So I don't, I think no matter, even if you're like the oldest soul out there, the most, enlightened, like, you still could take another trip on this stuff and walk away from it with even more understanding and clarity. And that's another thing too. If I could sum it up in one sentence, what these things have the potential to do is it increases clarity, and I think that's really key for everyone because one of the things Mark Passio actually talked about in his natural law seminar and several of his talks is how ignorance is at, people say money is the root of all evil, but he says ignorance is the root of all evil, and I think that's a really good point because, I mean, if we could really see how our actions affects the world at large and how they come back and affect us also and how deeply everything interconnects, we wouldn't be able to bring ourselves to do some of the things we do. It's because we're desensitized and closed off that we would even do evil things at all if you were truly, in full knowledge and awareness of our true nature, the world's true nature, how connected everything and everyone is. I mean, I feel like that's where conscience comes from and morality comes from, is awareness of the big picture. So
sure.
I do think it all comes back to state of consciousness, and I don't think there's a better tool than this for at least introducing people to the fact that higher consciousness exists. And then, I mean, I do also encourage people to go on a journey of things like yoga and meditation, and if they want to achieve these higher levels of consciousness long term, that's more practical than just like eating mushrooms every day or something like that, because, well, they don't work if you do them every day, but also well, yeah, I think they're kind of built that way. It's like, I've kind of thought of it like this before, like each trip you take, it might have certain lessons to teach you that time, but then you're supposed to integrate those lessons into your personal life. So like you might take a mushroom trip and it'll show you like, oh, this is what you need to fix in your life next, or this is the next thing you need to understand. But then you're supposed to go and apply those lessons. A lot of people will just keep returning to these compounds over and over without really applying the lessons in their life. And that would be kind of like if you were studying a musical instrument, you went to a teacher for a lesson, they showed you some things, and then you didn't go home and practice it and learn it. You just kept going back for more and more lessons, but never actually working on what they taught you. Eventually, the teacher would get frustrated or just stop teaching you altogether. I feel like that's how these compounds work, because I think they have a consciousness of their own.
Yeah, and you have a quote here by Terence McKenna, who, if anybody is not familiar with Terence McKenna, I recommend they look into him. I mean, a lot of his talks and a lot of what he's done is fantastic. And there's many others like him, right? He's only one person, but he has a lot of good stuff that I recommend people check out. You have a quote that you provided for us. Do you mind if I read it?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, so psychedelics are illegal not because a loving government is concerned that you may jump out of a third-story window. Psychedelics are illegal because they dissolve opinion structures and culturally laid down models of behavior and information processing. They open you up to the possibility that everything you know is wrong. So that sort of goes back to the idea you mentioned about how ignorance is the root of all evil, as Socrates said, as Plato said, as most philosophers have said, Buddha, all these cultures have talked about. No surprise, right? And of course, they may have influence on these chemicals as well. Wouldn't be surprised, but it's just, it's amazing. So that's really cool. Do you have anything to say about that quote?
Well, yeah, because he talks about dissolving opinion structures, culturally laid down models of behavior, information processing. That can apply to like any level of societal, of the control system, whether it's education, media, religion. and religion's an especially big one because I think deep down we all know there's something more out there. We all know there's more to ourselves than just this flesh and blood body and this lifetime on earth. I think we all know that, and we're all seeking something more. And religion, or at least the the big time religions, as we know them to be today, they're really used as a control mechanism because the people controlling them know that that everyone is seeking something bigger than themselves. So they try to fill that void with something false that'll give people the illusion of spiritual truth, but there's always, and there might be some truth in it, but there's always lies mixed in as well. I would say psychedelics are something that can just open you up to divine truth directly if you're ready for that kind of experience and you do it in the right setting, of course. But it's interesting because like in the Bible, for example, it kind of gives the opposite of impression of ignorance is the root of all evil, because in the Genesis story, it's actually condemning knowledge in a sense. The supposed God of the Old Testament tells Adam and Eve not to eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge or they'll die. So that's basically sending the message that you're better off being ignorant. And I mean, I know that's very controversial, especially to somebody who's a devout Christian or somebody who's always believed like the Bible is the truth and you don't question it, this is God's word. Or that they would say, oh, he forbid the fruit from us because it's for our own good to protect us. But how can knowledge itself ever be a bad thing? It's what we do with the knowledge that matters. And a lot of people believe that the forbidden fruit talked about in the Garden of Eden was actually something like mushrooms or ayahuasca. And because if we took it, we would be reminded of our powerful divine nature and how we're connected with everything. And we do have access to universal knowledge. And as far as what this God of the Old Testament really was, there's different opinions on that. Some people think it's just a made-up fictional character by people who wanted to dominate society. Some people think it might actually have been an ET of some kind, like the Anunnaki. There's a lot of stories about beings who came here hundreds of thousands of years ago, basically to take over mankind, and how they genetically downgraded us so that we would be in a lower state of consciousness and they could control us. And there are a lot of parallels between, if you read about the Sumerian Anunnaki, and then you look at the gods of these old religions and how they say, 1 minute they'll say like, oh, like I'm the Lord, I'm all loving and all merciful, but then look how controlling and demeaning and even bloodthirsty and murderous they can be also. Right. So I don't think religion gives people an accurate picture of what divinity and the universe is really all about. I think it gives a lot of half-truths, and that it's meant to keep people from seeing the real truth. I think if people started taking these psychedelics in a spiritual context, the religious institutions would probably dry up, actually. And we do see that happening slowly. Like church attendance is lower than ever, and I've heard. And even though it still seems like a lot of people out there are really asleep, the vast majority of them are, there are still more people waking up than ever before, I would say, whether it's to religion or trust in government. Like even the number of people questioning the whole corona psyop, that's gone up since it started. Like there's less and less people trusting vaccines or trusting anything we're being told, and I think that's a good sign. I think it's the kind of process that these compounds could speed up in society, and I think we do need it sped up from where we see it right now, because things are really escalating. And even though you could say people are waking up, it's not at a fast enough rate for the rate that the controllers are really clamping down on us either. It needs to be sped up more. Yeah, I think it could be kind of like an emergency reset button you know, you hear about the Great Reset thing they're pushing, the World Economic Forum. Well, that's definitely not a great reset. That's just a new stage of global control. I would say the real true great reset would be everybody pressing reset on their own consciousness, like Control Alt Delete, and just stepping back and like refreshing their view on the most fundamental things. Who am I? What is this world? What are we supposed to be doing here? What is right and wrong? Where do we come from? Where are we going? And Terence McKenna is someone I'd recommend listening to a lot of for those kinds of philosophies. And also Ram Dass, he's another one who I discovered early on in my journey and has inspired me a lot too.
Right.
I have one quote from him too, if there's time to look at it quick before we close out.
Yeah, I want to look at it now. But before we get into that, I just want to mention, like, you made some really good points. In fact, there's a reason why atheism is growing, because people are realizing how bad religion is. Now, that's not to say we're atheists, right? We're talking about spirituality.
Yeah.
Spirituality is not religious or atheist, and I think when you fall into either one, you're still being constricted, your worldview, right? I mean, you're not able to see this greater, bigger picture, why everything exists, why everything is here for a reason or a purpose, like you mentioned before. And the deists, even Taoists, are talking about that now. I mean, questioning all authority and questioning the religions and the institutions, and having to be reliant on books and having to be reliant on their buildings. That being said, I think the materials can come of great use, like the material, whether it's a physical thing like the psychedelics, or this summit, right, where I'm inviting you as a speaker and many other speakers, and we have resources and we have brochures and all this other stuff. We can use the physical world to our benefit. If some people might even be able to get money, that was stolen from them back, and there's people who are finding out all this stuff, and that could all be toward the freedom that we want. We can use the material to our benefit for the spiritual, but I think that still has to rely on the spiritual route, right?
Yeah, you need the whole picture. Like, you can go to either opposite extreme. Like, there's the atheists who think only the material exists, everything is meaningless, we're just here for a lifetime on Earth, and then we die, and that's it. We don't continue on after that. Morality is a man-made concept, all that stuff. There's no divinity. And then the opposite extreme, you see it a lot in what you might call the New Age movement, where it's like nothing in the material world matters. Everything's an illusion. Everything's subjective. The truth is relative. Your truth is different than my truth. It doesn't matter what you do here in the material, because this is an illusion and it's going to pass anyway. Those are both really imbalanced ways of thinking. And it's like the people at the top of this control structure, I think they want us in one extreme or the other. It's kind of like Republican and Democrat in politics, because if they can set up these two sides that look like opposites, people will tend to think if one's false, then the other's true. That's one of their biggest ways of controlling us, is that false dialectic, where it's like, people aren't realizing there's a third way that's often a completely different direction than any of the choices we've been handed. And true spirituality, I would say, does incorporate the physical world, because it's all part of reality.
Right.
I mean, spirituality is about consciousness and connection to whatever you consider divine source to be, and then the material world is where we apply our understanding. It's where everything plays out, and we see the reflections of ourselves in each other. So it all plays a part. You can't denounce the material for the spiritual, or the other way around either.
Yeah, and I think this perfectly ties in with this quote that we want to talk about, because it's talking about sort of the divisions that are created in the world. Do you want me to read it?
Sure.
Yeah, so Ram Dass, right, is his name.
Yep.
And this is a quote from Ram Dass. It says, "In our culture, we've been trained for individual differences to stand out. So you look at each person and your immediate thought is brighter, dumber, older, younger, richer, poorer. And we make all these dimensional distinctions, put them into categories, and treat them that way. And because of this, we get so that we only see others as separate from ourselves in the ways in which they are separate. One of the dramatic characteristics of the psychedelic experience is being with another person and suddenly seeing the ways in which they are like you, not different from you, and experiencing the fact that we are indeed brothers in in the true sense, that which essence in you and that which essence in me are indeed one. So saying that instead of making like divisions, we can see that there's something greater, higher, more connected, right?
Yeah, because he's talking about the difference between seeing everything as completely separated and fragmented, or recognizing there's one thread that connects it all.
Right.
And I think that is because when you're in the belief that everything is material, I mean, the material realm kind of gives the illusion that everything is separate. You don't see the connection between everything, but the connection between everything is on an energetic and spiritual level. So when you're open to that level, then you do see the connection between everything, and you realize my actions don't just affect me, they ripple out and affect everything, and then ultimately come back to me too. And I mean, whatever we do to others, we're kind of doing to ourselves also, because we are all part of the same system. It's like, I think of it as like cells in a body. Like each one of us, our bodies is made up of trillions of cells, and it's a good thing that they're all working together in harmony. And when they don't work together in harmony, that's what we'd call cancer or any other kind of disease. So if you look at society in the same way, like each one of us is a cell in something even larger than ourselves. I mean, all the dysfunction we see in society is almost like cancer on a larger scale, because the cells are fighting each other instead of working together for the good of the whole thing. And I think it's important to recognize that we are all part of a larger system, but that doesn't mean in a political sense, like through communism or something. See, something like communism, that's like a counterfeit of the real truth that we're all part of something greater and in the greater good. They're giving an illusion of that, saying like, do what we say because that's for the greater good, or you're all going to have the same amount of money because we're controlling it that way, and we're going to control all the resources and basically try to impose equality through control by a special class of people. And that's not equality, because they're still the ones calling the shots. So a lot of people make that mistake too. Like if you start talking about this concept of oneness and how we're all connected, and how we have to think of the greater good, they'll jump to the extreme of, oh, you're a communist, because they're only looking at it through like a political lens. They're not. I think if they had this experience of actual consciousness expansion, they would realize the difference. And what he's talking about here is really just like, what's good for the greater good is really what's good for all of us. There's another quote too by I didn't include it in the slides, kind of a controversial figure, but Aleister Crowley.
Right.
He had said, I forget the exact wordings, but like, if each individual was doing their true will, then everything would be in harmony. Like it was to that effect. I don't remember the exact words, but that's basically what he was saying, was if everybody just instinctively knew their part, what their part in the cosmic play is, and were doing it instead of going against it, then everything would be as it should be, because we're each a puzzle piece, basically. But it would be like if, like our red blood cells have a job, our white blood cells have a job. Like all the different types of cells in our body have a job. If they all started doing things that they're not supposed to do, then you'd have chaos. And when most people hear something like what we're supposed to do, they think that means what government tells us we're supposed to do, or what religion tells us we're supposed to do, and those are fakes and counterfeits. What I'm talking about is like what we're supposed to do according to divine plan, which you're not going to find out what that is through a book or an institution or a government or a church. That's only by going within, by quieting your mind and breaking out of the programming and just like, listening inwards to that higher part of yourself that is connected to everything. And then that's where the clarity comes from of what our place is and how we should act. I think, all the problems in society boil down to people not having clarity, people being in ignorance. And I think what we need is clarity and knowledge.
I agree. Yeah. So here's your slide about resources. I want everybody to look at this because this has everything that people would need to know, right? To basically do their own research. It's a starting point, right? I'm sure there's a lot more than this.
Oh, there's useful... a lot more than that out there, yeah. But this is a good starting point.
It says useful resources for learning about the science, the philosophy, and the use of psychedelic compounds. So thank you for providing that for people so they can do their own research and make up their own minds, right? Because we're not telling people what to do. We're not the government. We're here sharing knowledge, which is what humans should be doing, educating each other if they think something is important, not forcing it through the gun or the barrel, but sharing it out of just goodwill, more obligation.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that a lot of this stuff, right, and a lot of these resources you looked into yourself.
Yeah.
There's this belief system. We're at about an hour or so I figured I can ask you one last question if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
So there's this belief system that you are aware of and I am aware of and a lot of others on the summit are, but a lot of people in the world don't know about. It's this belief system that takes place in the mind called statism, the belief that, there's this authority that exists in some other human being, that they have some more rights than you, that they can do things that if you were to do, it's totally seen differently. And so how did you break out of this mentality? I call it mental slavery, and I even call myself an abolitionist, to kind of fit with the theme here. But how long were you a statist, and how did you break out of that? And did you use a lot of these resources?
Well, I was never quite as much of what you might call a statist as the average person is. Like even in kindergarten, I was the kid where, if the whole class was told to walk in a straight line down the hallway, I'd be off to the side, like spinning down the hallway, or like I would do the opposite just for the sake of doing the opposite. But I always looked at things as like I never agreed with the idea that just because something is the rule that you should follow it. Instead, you should ask yourself, like, does this rule make sense? Why are they asking us to do this or whatever? But as far as the part psychedelics plays in that, I think, well, like you said, statism is the belief in authority being in man. Like, a man or a group of men outside of ourselves has authority over us. I think the thing is, we all instinctively know there is a higher authority in the universe. But something like government or a religious institution, those are counterfeits that they give us to pretend to be that. The real authority isn't the government or the church; it's the Creator itself. I hate to use the word God or even the word source or because you can't really put a label on it. But I'll say the divine. The source of all existence, basically. There is objective morality. I would also suggest highly that everyone checks out Mark Passio's Natural Law Seminar, and also Corey, who's interviewing me right now, has a lot of great videos on his YouTube channel talking about natural law and morality. Because the thing is, there is, morality and natural law aren't relative or subjective. It is objective. And we all know at some level what right and wrong is because we have a conscience, we have a connection to that divine source. But if we're not aware of that connection and we're told at an early age, your authority is the government, your authority is the media, your authority is the school, your authority is the church, then we'll end up following that instead of what the true authority is, which I would say is the Creator, whatever you want to call that.
Yeah. It makes sense that there's substances that come from it too. That would help.
The word entheogen is another word for, it's the same thing as psychedelics.
Okay.
Entheogens would be like mushrooms, DMT, ayahuasca. The word entheogens, it has theos in it, which does mean of the divine. And the word entheogens actually means generating the divine within. So I do think that's what their place is, because when we're in the material world, we do have the ability to fall away from truth, and I think these things are here almost like like as a life vest or a lifeboat that we can grab onto and be pulled back into alignment when we get out of alignment. I think that's what their place is. So
Yeah.
the people who want to control us, they don't want us connected to that. They don't want us connected to our divine knowing and our divine nature, because then we would never allow ourselves to be controlled by them. We would, if they asked us to do something that was immoral, destructive to ourselves or to others around us, like, going off and fighting in a war that we have no interest in, we would say, well, no, that's wrong. I'm not going to do that. So they don't want us connected to our real natural conscience and divine knowing.
Yeah.
Because the less we are, then the more they can play that role and tell us what to do. But I do think the spell is breaking little by little. I think part of it is because more people have started using these compounds, and maybe part of it is also that people are just, you can only keep this act going for so long before people start, like, have to acknowledge there's something not right with the system. Like the whole COVID thing for 2 years, that was such an extreme version of statism. Like, it took things to such an extreme where I think a lot of people who didn't see it before all of a sudden saw it, like, whoa, wait a minute, like, now our lives are being controlled right down to, like, where we can go and who we can talk to and just every little detail. And that, I think that made a lot of people step back and question everything too. And I do think there is a larger force of good at work in the universe, probably the creator itself, trying to guide us in the direction of evolution and clarity. And I think that higher intelligence that we're all a part of is probably orchestrating things in a way where we are pushed towards higher understanding, but we also still have to be open to receiving that understanding.
Yeah.
And I think that's what these compounds are about, opening us to that.
Thank you so much, man, for sharing all this information. I absolutely appreciate it. I think a lot of people can potentially benefit off of this, especially if they are suffering from different medical ailments as well. I mean, something to definitely take a look into for yourself, right? Of course, make sure to, do your research and all of that. That's why you provide resources. Is there anything else that you want to mention before we close off?
So on this resources slide, I tried to give a few different types. Like, some of it's from a science perspective, telling you, like, because there's people who prefer to know the scientific laboratory perspective on something before they dive into it, which is definitely understandable. So some of it's from that perspective, some of it's just people's own experiences with it, some of it's from a spiritual perspective. So I think it's good to check out the full range of these perspectives on it. And yeah, definitely do your own research pretty well before you dive in, because it can be like diving into deep waters without knowing how to swim if you don't prepare yourself first.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do it at a time when there's tons on your mind, or you have work the next day, or anything like that. Pick a day and a time with no responsibilities that day, as little on your mind as possible, a quiet, peaceful environment, maybe out in nature. I would start with these resources here on the slide.
All right. Thank you, man, for joining me. I appreciate the conversation. I mean, really good stuff. I think it's definitely unique, and a lot of other speakers haven't talked about this, in detail. But it is something that I know a lot of people have used in this community and other communities, and trying to attain freedom, and it helps them, especially when they were in their darkest corners and they had, they didn't know where to look. So this can potentially help a lot of people. Thank you, man, for sharing everything. Aaron Nebbia, thank you.
Yeah. And thank you for having me.
Do you have any links or resources, people where they can find your work if they want to contact you or anything?
So, as far as an official website, I'm working on that right now. It should be coming soon. I'm actually kind of new to putting this information out there myself. So, but at this point, I have an Instagram page and a YouTube page. Third Eye Perspective 1111. If you type that in on YouTube, it's all separate words. Third Eye Perspective 1111. Or on Instagram, it's at Third Eye Perspective 1111. And I have some stuff on there about entheogens and some about other topics as well.
Awesome. Thank you, man.
Yeah, and I don't think any meetings or anything like this happens by coincidence. I think this was a great opportunity for, because I've been wanting to put this information out there in the right context where it reached the right people. And yeah, I think this was perfect for that. So yeah, thank you for having me.
I appreciate it. And if anybody wants to get these resources and hear a lot more speakers like this and a lot of things in general, go to nita.one/summit, nita.one/summit. This is the end of Slavery Summit. Thank you very much for watching. Take care.
All right, so that is Aaron Nebbia's interview. Good stuff. And we got a special guest on the air today. Aaron, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey, how's it going? My name's Aaron Butler. Helped with the co-hosting of the End of Slavery Summit. And I'm just here on the phone with Corey.
There you go. And he did not expect me to just bring him on, but I did. So, unexpected appearance. There you go. That was great, man. The guy's really smart. Yeah, he was really cool. Aaron, not this. Well, the Aaron on the phone with me, you know, he might be smart, but the other Aaron we're talking about, Aaron Nebbia. I'm just kidding. Both the Aarons are very smart people. They're both great people. And I never knew Aaron Nebbia. Like, I didn't know this guy until I started meeting him and interviewing him about the subject of entheogens. And I started to learn a lot more about it after that interview, to be honest. I didn't know much about the whole subject matter, and I asked him pretty honest questions, and he came out with really good responses. Like, you know, he never did content creation before. He didn't have his camera on, so it was more of like a podcast episode, but it was good. And speaking of that,
Right.
Aaron Butler is the one who is talking to me right now, and he has to produce content. And we're talking about maybe not on camera, but who knows? But it sounds like a similar story.
So, what sounds like a similar story?
You and the Aaron in the summit.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
As a speaker, I have, had many conversations with you about entheogens and the use of them and all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is life-changing information, and it's really nice to see people talking about this, with the the subject matter of freedom, and what these plant medicines actually do to encourage and promote freedom and help us see what freedom truly is.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Thank you, Minatory Myocarditis, for hanging out. Isn't that a great name? So yeah, Aaron and I will hopefully do more in the future. Aaron, anytime you're welcome to come on stream. We continue our slavery series anytime you want to. Just saying.
Thank you, brother. We'll get to
It
it.
could be tonight. It could be tomorrow. It could be the next day. It could be the next day. It could be the next day. Anytime. You're always welcome.
Tomorrow I am doing a class on teaching mushroom cultivation to some people in my community, and then I will reach out to you probably after that tomorrow night. I'll call you again,
Okay. Cool.
and we'll get that planned.
The unsophisticated, short-sighted
All right.
crook.
Cool. Anyways, the next video that's going to play, guys, is How to Be a Crook by Larkin Rose. This is an animation he did, and it goes over the different ways that people can become crooks. So, enjoy.
Today we will learn different methods you can use to be a crook.
Method 1.
The unsophisticated, short-sighted crook confronts a person directly and threatens him, usually while brandishing a weapon, and demands whatever money or other valuables the person has on him. While this method is fairly popular and sometimes effective, it has some drawbacks. For example, confronting someone in person poses a significant risk to you, the crook. Even if you only pick on smaller, weaker individuals, you never know when they might be armed. Furthermore, using this direct method involves a high likelihood that sooner or later you will be recognized, tracked down, and punished, whether by the victim, a bystander, or the police. And after you've done the crime, you get what you get, whatever your victim happened to have on him, and that's it. A one-time deal, usually with an unknown prize, maybe even nothing.
Method 2.
A slightly better way to be a crook is to break into houses when no one is around and see what you can steal. While there is some chance that you'll be noticed and confronted, the risk is a lot lower. And the average house is likely to contain a lot more valuables than the average person carries around with him. Nonetheless, there are still risks involved, and a high chance that you'll leave behind evidence, footprints, fingerprints, etc., that could later get you into trouble.
Method 3.
The more sophisticated crook avoids the risk of violent confrontation entirely by using fraud and deception rather than direct threats and violence. For example, you might call up little old ladies and trick them into giving you their credit card numbers, or set up some mail order scam that collects money and then magically disappears. The personal risk to you, especially the risk of being physically attacked by your intended victim, decreases dramatically. However, you might still get caught, and each time is still a one-shot deal. You get what you get and run the risk of getting in trouble, one crime at a time.
Method 4.
The next step up is to create ongoing frauds, methods that don't just rob people once, but that create recurring theft. For example, if you trick little old ladies into giving you their credit card numbers, instead of just having a quick shopping spree, you could set up a bunch of smaller, repeating thefts. A little old lady who gets charged $9.95 a month, which shows up on her credit card statement as helping poor orphans, is unlikely to question it. Get 100 little old ladies to do it, and you have an ongoing cash stream, without having to commit a new crime and incur new risks every time. Of course, there is still some risk of getting caught and punished.
Method 5.
A far better method of theft than any discussed so far is counterfeiting. While this requires serious technical and logistical resources, it has huge advantages. First of all, there is no direct victim who will even notice having been robbed. By printing fake money, you are actually robbing everyone who uses the currency. However, not only will they not notice the difference, but most people don't even comprehend why counterfeiting is bad or how it hurts anyone. The risk of your actual victims retaliating against you is therefore almost zero. The risk of them even knowing they were robbed is also almost zero, and wouldn't be much higher even if they knew you were printing your own cash, simply because most people have no idea what money is or how currency works. Once you're set up, you can create an ongoing source of wealth for yourself with very little physical risk. Of course, if the authorities find out, then you're in trouble. But aside from that risk, this would seem to be the pinnacle of the art of being a crook, having an unlimited supply of completely unearned wealth for yourself, while the victims never know what hit them, and in fact, never know that anything hit them.
Method 6.
The next step is only for truly sociopathic crooks, who don't just want unearned wealth, but want to dominate their fellow man. It's again based on counterfeiting, but instead of just printing money and buying stuff with it, you print money and loan it to other people. At first, this may seem counterintuitive. If you can just print as much money as you want, why bother to loan it or give it away? Well, suppose you print up millions of dollars and then lend that to hundreds of different people. They will each then feel indebted to you, as if you did them a favor. From then on, they will rob themselves every month, giving you a pile of money, while feeling a moral obligation to do so. Ironically, because they imagine the debt to be real, as if you actually loaned them your own money, they would view themselves as the crooks if they ever stopped going along with your crime. In fact, you should sometimes intentionally lend your counterfeit money out to the point where you know that people can't possibly pay it back. Why? because when they default on the phony loans of your phony money, you can openly steal their houses, cars, and other property by way of foreclosure, and they will feel bad about it, as if they were the bad guys for not being able to keep up with the payments. While you openly steal everything they have, they will apologize for not giving you more while feeling shame and humiliation. What could be better? And the more you steal via this method, the more you can expand the fraud. There is really no limit. Eventually, if all goes well, you can have almost everyone in the world feeling indebted to you. And when they default, you will quite literally own the world. And most of your billions of victims will have no idea what happened. They will all be reduced to impoverished slaves for you to do with as you please, you sadistic, megalomaniacal, sociopathic bastard.
Method 7.
The previously mentioned method is so effective, in fact, that there's really only one way to improve it. The only risk involved, up to this point, is that the authorities might notice and catch you before you can slip off to some non-extradition treaty country with your ill-gotten gains. To remove that final risk, take the final step and bribe the politicians to legalize your crimes. When the authorities have given their official legislative blessing to your massive perpetual fraud and even offer to send their mercenaries to protect you against your victims, should any of them ever wise up to what you're doing, then you will be the supreme crook of the world. However, you cannot accomplish this. You will never be the super crook who owns the world. Why not? Because someone else beat you to it. In this country, they're called the Federal Reserve. They own Congress, which legalized their fraud in 1913. Since then, through their politically sanctioned fractional reserve banking scam, a fancy term for legalized counterfeiting, they have stolen more trillions of dollars in assets than you can possibly imagine. The crime is so perfect that they even do it right out in the open, admitting all of the details of the scheme. And still, only a tiny fraction of their victims have any idea what happened, or even have any idea that anything nasty has happened at all. However, if something like this video, for example, were to go viral, so that the victims of this fraud all understood what had been done to them, well, what would happen then remains to be seen.
All right. So I hope you guys enjoyed that one. I love that animation. I think it's awesome. The next one is the gospel according to government. I don't know if you've ever seen this one, but it's pretty symbolic for many different reasons, and not because it necessarily correlates to religion, but because statism is usually called the largest religion. Something that people follow, beg, worship, ask for permission, and basically see it as their authority. They see it as the mechanism which comprises of all change in the world. It must come through a certain process. It must come through certain people. The same way some people might say God is in control of all of it. God must do all of it. God, gives us permission. And so that is going to be connected here and in great detail. Check it out.
Gather round to hear the good word from the Right Reverend Larkin Rose.
I've learned the hard way that a lot of people really cannot grasp satire and sarcasm. So I'm going to start with the disclaimer here. When I was getting ready to do what I'm about to do, I had two main concerns. The first was that I thought some people might be truly offended who really don't need to be, who really shouldn't be. My second concern was that some people wouldn't be offended when they totally should be. We read now from the Gospel according to government, first book of Politicians, chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning there was chaos and mayhem, and people were as wild beasts, and there was great wailing and gnashing of teeth throughout the land. Then it came to pass that politicians came down out of heaven, shining in glory, and spoke unto the people, saying, We are the Lord thy government, and we have decided to bless you with our presence, so that we may save you from your sins. Obey our commandments, pay tribute unto us, and salvation shall be yours. For without us, you are but stupid, violent animals, and only through our benevolent domination of you shall ye be transformed into a civilized and prosperous people. And the people wondered at the words of the politicians and were sorely afraid. But the politicians said unto them, Fear not. If you will only blindly obey the God-called government and mindlessly comply with our every whim, then you shall be blessed. But any who disobey our commands, the heathens and criminals who think for themselves, being evil in our sight, shall be cast into prison and banished from the collectivist authoritarian paradise we shall create. So cast aside your individual judgment, your free will, your conscience, and your moral codes, and follow us, the high priests of government, without thought or question. The foolish man builds his house upon consensus, cooperation, and voluntary interaction. But the wise man builds his house upon political promises, state coercion, and the lust for power. Free will, self-determination, and peaceful coexistence are the devil's work and lead only to fire and brimstone, suffering and torment. But blind obedience, unthinking loyalty, and unwavering subservience are the path to salvation. You have heard that it hath been said, Love your neighbor and do unto others as you would have done unto you. But we, the politicians, say unto you, Pray for the incarceration or extermination of those who are not like you. But pray also for your neighbors to be taxed and regulated. Pray for your friends to be controlled and enslaved. Devote your heart and soul to the rituals of politics, so that we, the high priests of government, may dominate all of mankind for its own good. Only then shall you have everlasting peace. We are the Lord thy government, and here are our commandments. Thou shalt have no other gods before government. Thou shalt follow no moral codes and no value systems above the arbitrary whims of the politicians. Thou shalt not take the name of government in vain or speak against us, the high priests of state. For those who do are sinners, criminals, and terrorists in our eyes, and shall be wiped from the face of the earth. Remember election day to keep it holy. Judge not the politicians or their mercenaries, lest ye be put on the no-fly list. Honor thy congressman and thy senator, that their reign may be long upon the land which the Lord thy government has taken from thee. Thou shalt murder by voting for those who engage in perpetual warmongering. Thou shalt kill whenever government commands it, and the killing shall be called national defense, serving one's country and spreading democracy. No greater love hath a man than this, that a man will go halfway around the world to murder complete strangers because we told him to. Thou shalt steal by voting for your neighbors to be taxed, and thou shalt hate and persecute any who resist. Thou shalt covet thy neighbor's income, and his car, and his house, and everything that is thy neighbor's. Thou shalt beg the Lord thy government to take these things from thy neighbor, and give them unto thee. Verily we say unto you, it is greedy and selfish to keep what you have earned, but noble and virtuous to ask us to forcibly take what your neighbor has earned. Thou shalt bear false witness by calling thieves and robbers public servants, by calling usurpers and tyrants leaders and representatives, and by calling those who advocate liberty for all criminals and terrorists. Blessed are the blindly obedient, for the politicians shall reward them. Blessed are they who hunger and thirst after power, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the voters, for they shall legitimize tyranny and oppression. Blessed are the bankers, for they shall embezzle the earth. Blessed are the jackbooted thugs, for they shall get away with murder. Blessed are the corrupt in heart, for they shall receive power. Blessed are the warmongers, for they shall imagine themselves to be gods. Blessed are they who have persecuted the innocent for the politicians' sake, for they shall be promoted. And cursed are the heathens and extremists who speak out against our tyranny, who encourage you to question authority, and who instruct you to disobey immoral commands. We, the politicians, say unto you, worship those who insult and exploit you, bow to those who extort and oppress you, and vote for those who despitefully use you and persecute you. Here ends our reading from the first book of Politicians, from the Gospel according to Government. I'm very happy to be able to preach to this congregation because I sense that many of you need help, because I believe you are losing faith in the God called government. Now, at times, our wise and benevolent political masters, they test our faith to make sure we are true believers by doing things which to us may seem insane and immoral. But it is not our place to question. If we are good and pure, we will gladly pay and obey. If we don't like the wars, if we think there's something wrong with them taking our money and giving it to giant banks, or running Ponzi schemes, or fabricating crime, it is a testament to our faith that we will blindly, unthinkingly go along with this oppression to show our loyalty to the state. It is a sin to question the wisdom of our betters, the politicians. I think God has something to say about this. Thanks. The righteous among us will tolerate every indignity and humiliation and insult to show our faith in the state. And only heretics would ever suggest that the politicians that are in Washington are not our rightful lords and masters. Do not listen to such blasphemy. In fact, report it to the authorities whenever you hear it. Ask not what you can do to improve society. Ask how you can empower and enrich the parasitic ruling class so that they can create a totalitarian utopia for all of us. I hope these words will be of value to you. I hope you will apply these lessons to your life. So the next time a cop or a tax collector or a bureaucrat decide to butt into your life or boss you around or rob you or assault you or tase you, I hope you can find the strength to pathetically grovel and submit without question and blindly obey their every whim and cooperate with whatever injustice and hardship they wish to inflict upon you or anyone else, because that is the mark of a virtuous, noble citizen, and that is the path to salvation. Look how well it worked for the Russians and the Germans and the Chinese and the subjects of every other tyrannical regime in history. May we too find peace through warmongering, freedom through subservience, justice through violent aggression, and prosperity through universal enslavement. Here end our lessons. Blessed are those who blindly follow orders and do not think for themselves. Amen. Okay, I'm back. I regained my sanity. Now, what's really sad is what I just delivered is basically the message that we all got, with a few exceptions. We all got from our teachers, from our parents, from the media, and from the government. Now, it wasn't quite that direct or honest, but that is the underlying message, that obedience to the state is a virtue. What's even more sad is government is the religion that people really believe in. Of all the people who label themselves Christian, Jewish, Muslim, atheist, agnostic, whatever, the real religion of the vast majority of people in this country and the world is the worship of government. It's the God they bow to, it's the God they pray for blessings, and it's the God they obey. Where they go on Sunday morning is just window dressing. I want to give a few closing words as this PorcFest winds down. To me, the beauty of PorcFest is not that we're all the same, because we're not. It's not that we all care about the same things, because we don't. It's not that we all agree on everything, because we don't. We just have one thing in common, and that's that we believe in freedom. You know, the media and people out there, they like to talk about diversity. I've never seen any crowd anywhere with the diversity of PorcFest. We have rich and poor and everything in between, and Christians, Jews, Muslims, atheists, agnostics, some religions I haven't even heard of before. Men and women, old and young, all sorts of races. We have gun toters and pacifists, gay and straight, a whole bunch of different personalities, different interests, different priorities, different beliefs. And we do disagree on a lot of things, which is why we like to stand around discussing, even arguing. But we get along. What you don't see here is you don't see us robbing each other. You don't see us assaulting each other or attacking each other or threatening each other. You also don't see cops. Now, you may see a couple and not know it, because apparently they think peaceful coexistence is such a horrible thing that they need to infiltrate it. Other than that, you don't see cops or authority or government, but we get along. So the last thing I want to say is a message not to the people here, but to everyone else on the planet, the rest of the world, knowing that hopefully this will make it to YouTube. Everyone else, you say you want world peace. You say you want freedom and justice and equality and security. You say you want peaceful coexistence. Well, guess what? We have all of that right here at PorcFest. So to the rest of the world, you say you want all those things, and I want you to have all those things. I want the whole world to be PorcFest. And it doesn't mean we all agree. It doesn't mean we see eye to eye on everything. We don't. We already don't, and we never will. That's just fine. We get along. To the rest of the world, if you really want those things, if you really want world peace, justice, freedom, you can have it. But I'll tell you the price. I'll tell you what it's going to cost you if you really want that. Give up the cult of statism and embrace humanity. Thank you.
Sometimes it can seem...
All right. Yeah, Minotauri, I got you, man. It's crazy. But, you know, we gotta have hope that everybody can heal. Definitely it would be important to look at everybody. We don't want any enemies here. We're trying to unify everybody around a lot of these ideas. This next video is a 3-part series. This is a 3-part series called The End of Oppression. The first one goes over the problem, the next one goes over the game, and the third one is good funding evil. I'm just going to let these play. These are very important videos. If you haven't seen them, they go over, again, the roots to everything that's going on. We played some videos from this lady yesterday. Josie the Outlaw is her name. Fantastic videos, honestly. Perfectly scripted. She even like interviews people on the streets. I think you guys will like this if you haven't seen it before. Here we go.
As if human history consists mostly of a long list of examples of man's inhumanity to man. This can make it tempting to conclude that violence, oppression, and conflict are the natural state of humanity, and that lasting peace is an impossible dream. But this is not the case.
The truth is, human beings, even with our imperfections, our negligence, and malice, are capable of achieving a society far better than what we have now. But to fix the problems of the world, first we must understand their root cause. Many assume that humans are just inherently bad, and think it inevitable that our greed and hatred will continue to lead to war and oppression. But before you assume that, ask yourself, are you inherently evil and violent? Are you incapable of peaceful coexistence?
If all laws were repealed today, would you go around robbing and hurting other people?
Absolutely not.
Okay. You would not. Okay.
No.
No.
You would not.
Nope.
Okay.
Oof. Sounds tempting, but no, I think I would do the morally upright thing.
Okay, and how about you?
No, I wouldn't.
You would not, okay.
Not a chance.
Okay, so you're not the reason that we need laws. Okay.
I don't think so.
You don't think so? And how about you?
No.
That's no.
Okay. All right.
It's just not moral.
If the vast majority of individuals answer this way, just who or what is causing all the misery and conflict? And why do the good, peaceful people allow it to happen? Of course, malicious individuals can and do inflict harm on others, but war, oppression, and large-scale conflict are the result of something else, are merely symptoms of one underlying disease, not greed, not hatred, and not simply the nature of man. If we examine large-scale oppression and violent conflict and see who is actually inflicting injustice on others and why, one common denominator shows up over and over again. The soldier does not, acting on his own and based on his own moral judgment, decide to go to foreign countries and inflict violence on strangers. The soldier fights and kills because he is told to, and because he does as he is told. The government enforcer who imposes the will of the ruling class upon the people does not do so because he personally decided, based on his own conscience, that such actions would be wise or moral. The police officer does what he does because he is told to, and because he does as he is told. All the tax collectors and other government busybodies who interfere in people's lives, hinder production and trade, and steal value from the people who create it, would never do such things on their own. They do what they do because they were told to, and because they do as they are told.
Throughout history, the vast majority of those who have inflicted injustice and oppression on society were not acting out of personal malice or hatred. They were merely following orders. But if you told someone to rob or assault your neighbor, no one would listen to you. So how does a situation develop in which so many otherwise decent people will do the bidding of a handful of tyrants?
So how do you think the famous tyrants in history managed to get millions of people to follow them? How do you think that happened? One person, millions of people doing whatever they say.
Probably like money and charisma. That's probably what I would say.
Yeah.
Cult of personality.
They use their power to oppress people, to make them feel like they didn't have any power, and that way they felt like they needed the king to survive.
By being cruel, by killing, by using
fear.
People as fear, as
Using
an example.
people's fear.
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 Having an army or something, yeah.
Okay.
I'm not sure actually. Probably through fear.
Okay.
Maybe.
Power.
Money.
Okay.
Power. They had power over the people by their little minions which enforce the power.
Once he achieves power, yes, a tyrant can rule by fear, having his minions and his armies crushing any who disobey his commands. But that does not explain how the tyrant got such power in the first place. In almost all cases when a tyrant is rising to power, the people are not gripped by fear. They are filled with excitement, happiness, and hope. Oppressive regimes grow not by promising pain and death, but by promising to take care of the people and to protect them from all the dangers of the world. Eventually, a dictator may rule by brute force and intimidation, but he cannot do that until he already has the loyalty and obedience of his enforcers and of his subjects. Government enforcers do not do what they do just because someone told them to, but because someone they view as a rightful lord and master told them to. The psychology experiments of Dr. Stanley Milgram show all too clearly that most people will do things they instinctively know to be wrong, including hurting complete strangers, if they are told to do so by someone they view as authority. Ironically, it is often people's distrust of their fellow man and the desire to have some powerful entity that can protect and defend the innocent that ends up tricking good people into condoning and funding the very institutions responsible for most of the violence and conflict in the world.
Most injustice is not the result of individual malice or greed or hatred, but is the result of normal people obeying the commands of a perceived authority. Many worry about how people might behave in the absence of government, when history shows that the far bigger threat to humanity is what people do in the name of government.
When asked what they want government for, people do not say division and oppression. They say they want it for good things. To protect people, to care for the poor, to provide infrastructure. But instead of achieving these noble ends, politics and government over and over again end up enriching and empowering tyrants, liars, and thieves. Though many people say they want government to make things fair and equal, and to protect and serve the common man, government always creates a massive power imbalance, with a handful of individuals having enormous amounts of control and money, and everyone else having to choose between obeying and funding the ruling class or being fined or caged. Since those in government are always vastly outnumbered by those they govern, why do the people allow this? Why would the common man imagine such a situation to be legitimate or tolerable? Why would he accept subservience to any master or feel obligated to continually surrender the fruits of his labor to an institution that views him and treats him like cattle?
Politicians are masters at using fear and emotionalism to pit different groups of people against each other, until the people are begging for more laws and regulations. Falling for these tactics is, quite literally, killing us. No, humanity does not need to be at war with itself, and when it is almost always the result of political opportunists intentionally causing strife and conflict in order to enrich and empower themselves at the expense of the freedom and safety of everyone else. Those in power, often by way of the mainstream media, tell us what we should care about, what we should worry about, and what we should fear. And the proposed solution is always more government power and control. By dividing people into different camps, such as Democrat and Republican, the people can be tricked into being perpetually angry at each other, while politicians on both sides benefit. Between the ongoing vitriol and divisiveness, many people don't notice how much the politicians agree on. They all agree that they should take your money and control your life.
The politicians talk as if they represent and serve their constituents, but when it comes down to it, everyone knows what happens if he refuses to pay taxes or disobeys any of the politicians' laws. Beneath the rhetoric, the situation is still one of rulers and subjects, masters and slaves. There would be no reason for free, prosperous people living in harmony with each other to want to be ruled, which is why those who crave power always emphasize, exaggerate, or create problems and conflicts to pit people against each other and scare them into believing that they need a master, that they need controllers and rulers to protect them from reality.
I want every man, woman, and child to understand how close we are to chaos. I want everyone to remember why they need us.
Tyranny does not come about through power-happy people confessing malicious intentions. It comes about through power-happy people feigning good intentions, thereby winning the loyalty and subservience of good people who then view the power-happy people as authority and government. In this way, freedom is whittled away piece by piece, always under the guise of serving the people, until nearly every industry and every activity is monitored, taxed, regulated, and restricted in the name of law, making the people unable to provide for themselves, unable to be independent and self-sufficient, unable to freely trade and cooperate with each other however they see fit. The primary problem with society is not that man is inherently evil, but that so many are willing to tolerate, advocate, or commit violent aggression when it is done in the name of government and law. When those committing injustice have an aura of authority, even most good people will comply and obey. When oppression is legalized, the proud law-abiding taxpayers will not only tolerate it, they will fund it, condone it, and vote for it. And while it may be easy to recognize the evils committed by tyrants and their hired guns, too many people fail to realize that tyrants only have power, only have wealth, only have influence because the people give it to them. A regime that no one viewed as legitimate, no one paid for or obeyed, would not exist.
Where people do not look to an authority, do not recognize an authority, there is none. So if you want to know the source of most conflict and violence in the world, you might begin by looking in the mirror and asking yourself, which acts of aggression against your neighbors, which examples of man's inhumanity to man have you paid for, cooperated with, condoned, and voted for?
For all of recorded history, some people have been trying to dominate and rule over others. On a small scale, sometimes an individual or a gang can control and extort others through outright violence. But on a larger scale, especially since technology has leveled the playing field when it comes to physical combat, being biggest and strongest is not enough. So modern tyrants gain and maintain power, not just through brute thuggery, but through deception and manipulation. Physical control has been replaced by mind control. An aspiring ruler now needs to persuade his potential subjects that it is in their own best interest that he have power, including power over them. The tyrant must convince his victims that their own subjugation is necessary, moral, and legitimate. Government, whether in the form of a dictator, a parliament, a congress, or some other arrangement, is the group of people thought to have the right to rule. In other words, thought to have authority over a certain area. What governments do is issue commands, which they call laws, using force to punish any who disobey. Despite the modern rhetoric and euphemisms, government always means a ruling class. Those in power command, and everyone else either obeys or is punished. But to get people to tolerate such an arrangement, to get the common man to accept what is essentially a master-slave relationship, those who crave dominion have to find ways to get their subjects to condone their own subservience and enslavement. First and foremost, a modern tyrant must create an air of legitimacy around his regime, must convince his subjects that he is a rightful and legitimate authority. At one time, kings insisted that God himself had directly granted them the right to rule. Today, most people scoff at such a claim, while still accepting the more modern excuses for authoritarian domination, which are a lot more involved and complicated, but no more reasonable or rational. Humanity has evolved past the superstition of the divine right of kings, but has yet to evolve past the superstition of the divine right of politicians.
Tyrants today have to work harder to deceive the people into accepting the status of obedient subjects, but they still manage to do so most of the time, using a few basic methods of deception, manipulation, and propaganda.
In many countries, including the United States, Soviet Russia, and Communist China, ruling classes have claimed the right to dominate the people based upon constitutions and elections. Even under the most vicious tyrannies, those in power always label their actions as legal and claim to be representing and serving the very people they extort and oppress. As much as people have been taught to revere democracy and associate it with freedom and justice, democratically elected governments have committed more murder than any other institution in the history of the world. Instead of actually empowering the people, democracy merely gives the people the false impression that they are in charge, and the false notion that, as long as they are allowed to vote, oppression and tyranny will be impossible. History shows otherwise. In reality, elections can be the tyrant's best friend, as they can be used to dupe the people into imagining that they have given their permission and consent to be dominated and controlled. At best, the people are given the choice of who will rule them, but true freedom, being ruled by no one, is never one of the choices in any political election. Even when their ballot choices are selected by the ruling class itself, allowing people to vote can deflect and diffuse their anger and resentment, tricking them into focusing their time and energy on pointless rituals which never achieve freedom, so they don't start disobeying or resisting instead. So many people now view the whole process, the Constitution, the form of government, the elections, appointments, and other rituals, as not only legitimate, but sacrosanct. That to condemn the entire game and to identify it for what it is, just the latest excuse for authoritarian domination, is considered blasphemy by many, which shows just how effective the tyrant's propaganda still is at duping the people into accepting and advocating their own subjugation. But simply making a ruling class appear legitimate is not enough. For a regime to grow, each grab for power and each corresponding decrease in individual freedom must be done in the name of good intentions and noble motives. The most effective means of convincing people to give up their freedom and their money to a master is to convince them that if they don't, horrible things will happen, which is why nearly all of politics is based on fear-mongering. A tyrant does not obtain power by making the people afraid of him, but by making people afraid of each other. Even the most vicious tyrannies grew by railing against other threats and injustices, whether real or imagined, and by convincing the people that only by giving government huge amounts of money and power could imminent catastrophe be avoided. And those who seek power not only exploit and exaggerate real problems, but often terrorize the people with make-believe dangers, or intentionally cause problems themselves, just to have an excuse to increase their own power. One very old technique for doing this is known as a false flag operation, where a regime perpetrates acts of unjust violence while making it look as if they were done by some foreign enemy. Once the hatred and fear of the people has been stirred up, they almost always eagerly support the authoritarian agenda of those in power. A prime example can be seen in the recently declassified Operation Northwoods documents, which show that top officials and the U.S. military plan to stage fake terrorist attacks in Cuba and on U.S. soil and blame them on the communist regime of Fidel Castro in order to garner public support for a military invasion of Cuba. The basic tactic is not new and has been effectively used for centuries by the authoritarian empires all over the world, and it would be extremely naive to think that such tactics are not still being used today. And there are many other methods governments can use to create a problem and then use that problem as an excuse to demand more money and power for itself in the name of fighting against the very problem it created in the first place. This can be done by engineering an economic collapse, by causing poverty to justify the creation of a welfare state, by creating black markets which lead to increased crime to justify a militarization of the police force, by fueling racial or religious conflicts, and so on. Whatever those in power can do to train the people to be scared of the idea of not having a powerful government around will almost always result in the people welcoming or even demanding violations of their own rights and liberties.
Of course, there will always be conflict in the world, but government only exacerbates and enhances disputes and problems intentionally, because if the people are not afraid of some threat or danger, real or imagined, they would never have a reason to accept a master over them. Government power does not serve to solve problems. Problems serve as the excuse to create never-ending government power. How many problems can you think of that government has ever fixed? Did the countless laws and billions of dollars end the drug trade? Did it end prostitution? Did it end terrorism? Did it end poverty? When has there been any government program or department which achieved its goal, solved a problem, and was therefore disbanded and repealed? It is never in government's interest to solve problems or eliminate threats, because it is always the fear caused by problems and threats which trick the people into tolerating the existence of a ruling class.
Another ploy used to convince people to support tyranny is for politicians to seek votes from one group of people by promising to tax or control some other group. Those who seek power intentionally create divisions between rich and poor, black and white, men and women, different religions and cultures, and so on, telling each group that if only they elect the right candidates, their priorities and values can be enacted into law and imposed upon the rest of society. Politicians are masters at exploiting the fact that few can resist the temptation to have their views and beliefs forced onto everyone else. On every possible disagreement or difference in opinion, politicians will offer to use the force of government to legalize one viewpoint and outlaw another. Some voters will cheer for a tax to help the poor, while others will cheer for a tax to fund a police force. The politicians propose one new program or agenda after another, each requiring more money and power for the ruling class and less freedom for the people. If someone thinks that he knows how things should be, some politician will always be there promising that if he is elected, he will make that vision a reality. As long as people view law and government as a legitimate way to control others, why wouldn't each person try to use the democratic process to force his neighbors to behave in certain ways and to fund certain things? Nearly everyone falls into this trap when it is called democracy, and painted not only as moral but noble, as participating in the process and doing one's civic duty. The end result of politics is never the perfect society, or even the people getting what they want. The end result is groups of people constantly being played against each other, each side of every dispute asking government to forcibly rob and control the other side, with the only real winners being the political class. Over and over again, the people have ended up enthusiastically advocating their own enslavement, simply because it is so tempting for each person to believe that the world would be what it should be if only authoritarian power was used to serve what he wants and what he believes in. As long as the battle is over whose ideas should be forced on everyone else, freedom and justice always suffer. If the other deceptions fail, the fallback argument of those who seek power is that someone has to be in charge, that there will always be someone at the top, and that the only real question is who it should be. When the people accept this lie and assume that government is just an unavoidable fact of life, they will always end up legitimizing a system of domination by petitioning and voting, instead of actually trying to achieve freedom or even knowing what real freedom would look like. Democracy often devolves from being a question of what people actually want and support to an argument over which political party is less corrupt and destructive than the others. As much as people may lament negative campaigning and mudslinging, it works, precisely because those who crave power really have no positive vision to offer, so their only recourse is to paint the other politicians as being even worse. Many people view their vote not as some empowering positive thing, but as an act of self-defense and an attempt to keep the even worse crook out of power.
Whoever you last voted for, did you fully trust and support them, or did you just distrust them less than the other person?
Distrusted less.
Okay.
Definitely.
Distrusted them less than the other person.
I think I mostly trusted him, mostly.
You mostly trusted him?
Not all the way, but like by a large amount more than the other one.
Distrusted them less than the other person. I guess distrust more than the other, but
I think I mistrusted him less than the other person.
I agree.
I voted against somebody to vote for the one I voted for. Yes, not voted for him. I voted against the other person.
I guess it was more like a lesser of two evils sort of deal for me.
Now for the difficult question. Have any of these methods of manipulation and deception worked on you? Have you accepted the idea that constitutions, elections, and other political rituals gave someone else the right to rule you? Do you view violent aggression as legitimate and righteous when it's called law enforcement? Do you feel a moral obligation to obey whatever commands those in power decide to enact as law? Do you view anyone who disobeys any of these politicians' decrees or refuses to pay tribute to them as being a criminal deserving of punishment? Have you ever willingly sacrificed and surrendered your freedom and the freedom of others based on some politician's promise that if you will only give him control, he will use his power to protect the people from some horrible danger? Have you ever fallen for the temptation to vote for some candidate or political party that promised to use government to force your values and opinions onto others? Or promised to coerce others into funding whatever programs and agendas you think are important? Or maybe you're just resigned to the idea that someone has to be in charge. The government is inevitable, that the political system we have may not be perfect, but is the best we can hope for. So you continue to play the game, vote for the lesser of two evils, and passively and obediently accept the outcome.
For millennia, well-intentioned people have been trying to achieve peace and justice through the political process, trying to vote their way to utopia, hoping that if only we had the right form of government, the right set of laws, the right checks and balances, the right people in charge, that society could be what it should be. But to one degree or another, the end result of politics has always been a ruling elite made rich and powerful at the expense of the prosperity and freedom of the people. Tyrants do not create their own power out of thin air. They trick the people into giving it to them. As long as people continue to make the same assumptions, fall for the same deceptions, keep playing the same games, and keep looking for a political solution, they will get the same results. But when people stop falling for the tricks, stop fueling oppression with their money and their obedience, then, and only then, will the cycle of tyranny and oppression end. Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes is quoted to have said, "Taxes are the price we pay for a civilized society. But if being civilized means to coexist peacefully, interacting through voluntary means instead of by violence, then taxation, one group of people forcibly depriving another of the fruits of their labor, is the exact opposite of being civilized. To steal the money that someone has earned through voluntary means is to steal that person's productivity, his time, and his effort, to steal a part of his life. And to steal a part of someone's life is called slavery. Taxes are often characterized as the people simply paying for the services they receive from government, but this is a gross mischaracterization. Imagine getting a bill from a private business for services you never asked for and may not even have wanted. And imagine that if you don't pay whatever price the business decides, they will wipe out your bank account, seize your assets, and possibly put you in a cage. In any context other than government, such behavior would of course be seen as immoral, unjust, and criminal. And yet we're told that when government does the same thing, it is legitimate, moral, and necessary for society. There are two sides to the immorality of taxation. First, it deprives the productive people of a large part of the wealth they produce, stealing their buying power, reducing their ability to provide for themselves and their families, and making them less able to support the things they care about. Second, it forces people to fund and support things which go against their wishes, that conflict with their own values and priorities, and that are contrary to their own interests. Government does not produce any wealth. Everything it spends, it must first take from the productive people, whether through open taxation or the hidden tax known as inflation. As a result, it is always the productive, law-abiding taxpayers who foot the bill for tyranny. It was not Mao, Stalin, or Hitler who funded or manufactured the guns, tanks, and bombs that terrorized and murdered so many millions. It was the good people of China, Russia, and Germany who felt obligated to hand over the fruits of their labor to those wearing the mantle of authority. Likewise, all the government bureaucrats, the abusive law enforcers, the corrupt politicians, their buildings, their vehicles, their computers, their utilities, their salaries. We are the ones paying for all of that. And perhaps most ironically, when it comes to the IRS and all of their tax collectors, we are the ones paying them to rob us. Everything of value in the world has come from the efforts of productive people, while the political class can only steal and destroy. In short, the good have always funded the evil, and that will continue to be the case as long as the good people imagine a moral obligation to surrender a portion of what they earned by way of taxes to those who claim the right to rule. Taxes are not the price we pay for civilized society. Taxes are how civilized society pays for its own destruction. Taxation is no different than a mafia protection racket, where a gang claims to be protecting you, while that same gang threatens to hurt you if you don't pay up. Yes, the gang may sometimes go after other thieves and aggressors, but if you don't pay their protection fees, you know that they are the ones who will be at your door next. Some argue that because taxes pay for roads, defense, protection, and helping the poor, ending taxes would therefore mean no roads, no defense, no protection, and no help for the poor. In any context other than politics, such an argument would be immediately recognized as completely invalid. It would be akin to a common criminal stealing $100 from you, handing you a sandwich, and then arguing that you should thank him for having robbed you, because otherwise you would have starved.
Would you like it if you could choose for yourself which government programs, if any, you were going to pay for?
Yes.
Yeah.
Say yes, definitely.
Oh yeah, I would like that.
Okay.
Yeah. I think, idealistically, yes, but I don't think, again, it's a matter of things actually working.
Sure.
And that you can't pick and choose.
Okay.
Absolutely.
If any. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'd like to know where my money is going.
Absolutely.
If they're taking my money and using it for programs, I would like to know exactly where my money's going.
No, that's not how it works. Just because I don't agree with something doesn't mean it shouldn't be covered or paid for. This is how this country runs. If we don't like the process, then we have to change the process. But the way it is now, that's how it is.
Politicians constantly raise tax rates and impose new taxes against the wishes of the people, and constantly spend the confiscated wealth on things a lot of people don't want, such as corporate bailouts, a massive welfare state, and perpetual warmongering. If the money was only used for services people wanted to purchase, and things people thought were good for society, there would be no need for an IRS, no need for those in power to back up their demands with the threat of fining or prosecuting anyone who doesn't pay up. They may pretend to be serving and representing you, but the politician's true attitude is obvious. They don't care what you want,
and they believe that they have more of a right to decide how your money is spent than you do.
Those in power and in the mainstream media speak of taxation as the way people pay their fair share of the costs of society. The bizarre implication is that if money first passes through the hands of politicians and bureaucrats, it's good for the country and society, but if it doesn't, it's not. This implies that the people being forced to fund Ponzi schemes, government waste and corruption, and programs and agendas many people don't even approve of, somehow serves the common good, but that the people voluntarily donating, spending, or investing their own money on what they think is important is somehow selfish and destructive to society. Most of the victims of the government extortion racket have fallen for this rhetoric, and as a result, believe it's necessary, legitimate, and good for a ruling class to forcibly extort all of the productive people.
If you try to avoid paying tribute to the politicians, your so-called fair share of taxes, if you try to prevent yourself from being robbed to fund things you oppose, your neighbors would likely view you as the criminal and view those who would attack you as noble law enforcers. It would be like someone getting his car stolen, and instead of being angry at the thief, being angry at his neighbors who didn't get their car stolen.
By portraying mass robbery as the people paying their fair share of the costs of society, thieves who have legalized their thievery can convince their victims to be proud of having been robbed and to resent anyone who wasn't robbed. This is just one more example of how politicians use the tactic of divide and conquer to keep the people at war with each other, so they don't identify the real root of the problem, which is those who seek to rule over others. There is a simple question which demonstrates whether someone has fallen for this trick or not.
Would you take this deal? You never have to pay any kind of tax, income tax, property tax, sales tax, etc., but you're not allowed to vote for anyone else to be taxed either.
I think that would. I mean, if it's like in the like a very general sense, then yeah, I would agree to that.
Yeah.
Yep. Sure would. I don't think we should be taxed. No.
I agree. Okay. Absolutely.
Absolutely not.
Okay. So you would not take that deal?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's okay.
There is nothing greedy or immoral about wanting to decide where your money goes, nor is there anything noble or virtuous about handing your earnings over to politicians. In fact, refusing to fund immoral and destructive agendas is righteous and justified, and does serve humanity and society as a whole, even if the thieves portray such actions as criminal. In contrast, it has always been the obedient, law-abiding taxpayers who have funded every government oppression in history, and that is nothing to be proud of.
Alrighty, it's that time of the night. I know it ended a little bit early, technically, considering the fact I tend to end these streams pretty earlier than usual, but figured it might be a better time for people. I don't know. Basically, just go live whenever. But when it comes to the live roundtable on the 16th, it will be more specific. It will be at 8 p.m. EST. For those of you who are on the live stream, get a little hint as to when it will be. 16th, 8 p.m. EST. Know your place. Be a shoe. Wow. Great quote, Active Research. Totally great interview. Great quote that we need. We talked about interviews. Now I have interviewing in my head. Goodness gracious. But yeah, it's nice to see all of you guys. And I think that's it. I don't know if anything else is happening, so I don't think I'd be gaming right now. But yeah, we went through most of the interviews, most of the featured videos, but of course there's always more resources to always check out. Again, it's day 12 currently, and we just watched a lot of the content from day 12. There's still always more though, such as the free gifts and the different links, and Hannah Maria is also offering a discount on her activist course, which teaches people how to become their own activist. That could be pretty helpful when it comes to action, for sure. But among the free gifts, you'll see there's several websites, one of which is like literally hundreds of quotes, probably actually a lot more than 100, maybe close to 1,000. On striketheroot.com. That's not the actual name of the website, so be sure to go to day 12 to see the actual name. And of course, then there's voluntarius.com, there's Mises.org, it's the way it's said, but spelled Mises. And then there's a shadow work website. All very helpful resources, I mean, among other resources that have already been shown and much more to come. Again, on the final day, there will be tons of action resources, so be sure to stay tuned for that. And if you have any questions, be sure to bring it to the table, to the round table, because we'll be going around town talking to every person and seeing what they think about different questions. And I will introduce questions in case nobody has any questions, but if people are curious. Hey, B1, B17, you saw my Nightbot command, you're like, I gotta try this. I'll put on my camera, I might as well. I'm not gonna look good though, because I'm totally not paying attention. What up? Wearing my only yellow shirt again. I'm in gamer mode for the people on Twitch, so B1, welcome to the stream, man. I've never seen you before. Nice to see you. Putting out that exclamation point slavery in the chat, which shows you my first book that goes over slavery. Mandatory, you said peace out. Did I say peace out already? Did I already say bye? I didn't say bye. I said put on my camera, right? Oh, you're saying peace out because you're leaving. Okay, fine. Well, I get that. I like that pun. Yeah, so it's true though, as you can see, if you do any exclamation point, most of the time it will work. I don't have every exclamation point under the sun, but I have slavery, I have like religion, I have politics, all the common, I guess you can say, exclamation points. If you go on Twitch and you type exclamation point, whatever topic you want, you'll get a link to it, basically. But yeah, so if you're new here, welcome. Follow the stream if you haven't already. I don't know, share it around with people. I don't usually say all of that, but share the summit. Share the summit. The summit's the most important. There's a bunch of important resources for everybody, and we need to keep getting it out there. Day 13 is tomorrow. That's 1 hour from now. You will get the email if you sign up now, and there's a ton of helpful videos tomorrow as well. I think a bit more obscure videos that will be playing tomorrow, and an extra featured video of somebody who exclusively created a video for the summit, and 3 interviews, one going over action, which has to do with teamwork, another going over health, the importance of health and how that relates to slavery and abuse in the family structure, and another one going over mental health, because that is really important. While we talk about mental slavery, another part of it is looking at mental health, and mental health is connected, of course. It's very important with what's going on in the world. I'm at the part with the dude in the Patriot jersey going, nope, that's not how it works. What are you talking about, Active Research? Goodness gracious. Nice to see you, though. I don't know if you saw, but I did link your huge OneDrive folder for everybody in the summit. I think that was like on day 6 or day 7. I'm not sure if you saw that, but very helpful. Thank you for sharing that research with everybody, you know, all that information. So again, it will be there for people on the final days of the summit. There'll be replays of every single day, so they can check out any day they want. And so be sure to check it out if you haven't already. Lately, there's been a lot of interviews, different other projects being planned, and I'm not going to share too much, but it's going to be very interesting. Different experimentations with different approaches and different people, and of course the interviews are interviews. I don't know what else to say about that, except they tend to be a little bit different from usual interviews that I do. One of them goes over a little bit more into detail what I talk about with my own philosophy, although of course you don't need to agree with my own philosophy at all. And the other one is more so, it just allows us to expand on concepts. And the other one is more so going over the whole idea of my personal journey in relation to, you know, this generation and what we're trying to achieve in this world, trying to navigate through all the confusion. It's a very good talk. You know, coming from like the feminine masculine balance as well. So I think it'll be very interesting. I don't know what Mark Passio has been up to lately. I don't know what everyone's been up to. I know Larkin is finishing up his documentary, his movie, which is going to be awesome. But stay tuned, guys. There's a lot happening. If you care about freedom, this is the place to be, as I say all the time. And take care, everybody. I'm going to go. Good stuff. Good stuff. Good talks. Appreciate you all. Active Research, Shine, Minotaur Myocardis. Keep sharing the summit. Very important. We get it out there. Print stuff, get the t-shirts, whatever works. Just get the message out there. It's all that matters. Thank you guys. Appreciate it. Peace out.